Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The tide was out farther than usual that evening. I had my gear stacked along the edge of the rocks at Crescent Bay, the kind of jagged coastline that swallows your shoes if you're not careful. I was alone, just me, the waves and the gulls picking at whatever had washed up. I like coming out here at night. Fewer people, fewer questions, and you can actually hear the ocean instead of traffic or neon signs buzzing in the distance. I set my rod up, dropped the line in, and leaned back against the cooler, letting the cold air from the water roll over me. The sky was a deep navy with scattered stars, and the wind was light, carrying that faint smell of seaweed and salt. Everything was normal, quiet. Then, out near the tip of the bay, I noticed something, a faint glow under the waves. I thought at first it was bioluminescence. I've seen the little flashes before when you stir the water too hard. But this was different. It was steady, not flickering, not sparkling. And it moved, not drifting with the tide, but along, smoothly, like it was gliding. I sat up. My cooler rattled when I nudged it with my knee. The glow moved closer, but it didn't have the way a boat would. There was no wake, no reflection, nothing to suggest anything solid above water. My first thought was a jellyfish or a school of squid, but nothing moves this big, this slow, and keeps a solid, even light like that. I grabbed my flashlight, swept it over the water. The light cut a line through the black, and for a second I could see the water surface ripple as if something beneath it moved fast. And then, nothing. Just the dark water reflecting the stars. I lowered the beam and the glow came back, just for a moment, far enough out that I could barely keep it in my peripheral vision. I stood up, trying to make sense of it. All right, just a fishing buoy, I muttered. But there was nothing out there. No red or green lights, no reflective tape, just that faint, pale glow moving with impossible precision. I went back to the rod, thinking maybe I was tired, letting my eyes fool me. But every so often I'd catch that glimpse again, just under the waves, like it was sliding along some invisible track. I'd shine the flashlight and it would vanish instantly. It wasn't hiding, it was gone in the moment the light hit it. I walked closer to the water's edge, boots sinking slightly into the wet sand, keeping the flashlight sweeping. The glow appeared again, now a little farther to my right. It moved sideways in a way that made no sense with the tide. I thought about calling out, maybe someone in a kayak playing a joke, but the wind would have carried a voice easily. No one responded. Nothing moved above the water. The waves lapped at my ankles. I knelt down, peering into the blackness, and for a moment it was almost right under me, a smooth, pale shimmer just under the surface. I could almost make out a shape, something elongated, but it wasn't a fish or a seal. Too flat, too uniform. And then, just like that, it darted away. Not in the slow glide it had been doing, but fast, like a ribbon pulled by a hand I couldn't see. I stumbled back, heart beating faster than it had in a long time. My rod clattered to the rocks, and I grabbed it instinctively. The glow didn't follow immediately. It hovered, paused in the water for maybe 10 seconds, and then it was gone. Not underwater, not bobbing on the surface, just gone, like it had never existed. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. The tide hadn't changed that quickly. There wasn't a wave or shadow that could have hidden something that big. I looked around. The shoreline was empty. No fishing boats returning, no lights on the distant docks, nothing. Just me, the rocks, and the stars reflecting off the water. I sat back on the cooler, trying to breathe normally. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker, a trace of movement under the waves, but when I trained the flashlight on it, nothing. And not like a normal animal that hides. It seemed like it evaporated the moment I tried to see it. The sound of the ocean filled the gaps. No gulls, no wind, just the low rolling of the tide and my own uneven breathing. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to look back too quickly. When I did, the glow appeared again, closer to the rocks, sliding under the waves at the same impossible speed. I froze, my boots in the wet sand, rod still in hand, and the thing just moved there. Low and quiet, no bubbles, no splash, nothing. I tried to record it with my phone, I raised it, flashlight off, camera ready. The glow was there, directly in the beam's path, and then gone. Not underwater, not a flicker, just gone. My thumb hovered over the screen, and when I lowered it, the glow came back 100 feet down the shore. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Half an hour? Every time I blinked, every time I looked away for a second, it would move. Not with current, not with any wave pattern I could follow, just sliding in perfect arcs across the water. Finally, I packed up. I left the rod, left the tackle, and walked up the path to my truck. Every step felt heavier than the last, like my mind was trying to weigh the weird against the normal. The truck was warm from the day, the heater hissing, and the radio crackled when I switched it on. I kept glancing out the windshield at the dark water, half expecting the glow to come chasing me. But the bay was empty, just black, still, and normal again. The drive home was silent. My headlights lit up the road and the forest beyond, but nothing reflected back and moved in the water. When I got to the house, I went inside, locked the doors, and poured a cup of coffee. I stared out the window toward the bay, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, but I couldn't. Days later, the bay was quiet in the daytime, the sun sparkling on the water, no strange glow. Boats went by, gulls circled, fishermen hauled in crab traps. Everything was normal, except in my head. I haven't gone back at night. I haven't told anyone much. People think you're a little odd if you say something like that. I get it. But I know what I saw. I can't explain it. Nothing I know could move like that underwater without leaving a trace. Nothing that bright and steady just disappears when you look at it. And even now, months later, when I hear the ocean outside, I catch myself scanning the waves, half expecting to see that pale glow sliding silently beneath the surface again. I never saw it again. Not at Crescent Bay, not anywhere else. But sometimes, when the tide is out and the sky is empty, I swear I can feel the way it moved, just under the surface, always gliding, always quiet, always just out of reach. I was halfway up the ridge when my compass started acting weird. 1 minute the needle was pointing north like it should, then suddenly it spun in tight circles, jerking back and forth. I blinked, thinking maybe it had gotten too close to my metal water bottle or something, but even after I set the bottle aside, it kept going. That's when I noticed the glow. At first, it was subtle, a faint, bluish light seeping between the trunks of the pines. It wasn't like a lantern or a flashlight, more like the forest itself was humming with color. I froze for a second, convinced it was just the evening sun catching the mist, but the sun had already dipped below the ridge. Shadows stretched long across the trail, and the light didn't flicker or fade with the wind. It moved, slowly, steadily, uphill, without sound. I adjusted my pack and tried to tell myself it was probably a deer with some reflective gear or a hiker ahead of me, but the movement didn't match the trail. It wasn't stepping around roots or rocks. It glided straight over obstacles like it didn't even exist in the same space I was in. My heart started racing, and I took a cautious step forward. The compass spun again, almost violently this time, then paused, needle twitching before settling on north. I let out a shaky breath and checked behind me. Nothing. Just the darkening forest. I debated whether to turn back. I wasn't far from the ridge's summit, and the thought of explaining why I'd bailed didn't sit well with me. But I stayed low, ducking behind a cluster of young pines, and watched the glow move. It seemed to be aware of the slope, slowing on the steeper sections, then accelerating where the ground leveled. There was no sound, no crunching of leaves, no snapping of twigs, nothing that should be there if it were physical. I pulled my phone out, thinking maybe a camera would help, but the screen didn't respond properly. The glow reflected faintly on it, but the image looked wrong. Blurred, like long exposure, streaks of light stretching across the screen that weren't there to the naked eye. I swiped a few times, restarted the camera. Same thing. At that point, I stopped trying to document it. Trying to explain it logically wasn't working, and honestly, I didn't want to lose track of it by fumbling with electronics. As I moved cautiously uphill, the glow stopped suddenly on a small rise. I froze again. It pulsed twice, almost like a heartbeat, then continued moving. The air felt heavier, and the usual smells of pine and damp earth seemed muted, almost sterile. I had the sense of being watched, but every time I tried to find a vantage point to see if anyone was there, the glow seemed farther uphill, just beyond trees or rocks. I heard a rustle to my left. My first instinct was to swing my head and call out, but I hesitated. If it was a person, they hadn't made noise before. I stayed still, straining, but all I got was silence and that faint rhythmic pulsing of light. Then, almost imperceptibly, it seemed to change direction, moving in a wide arc, still uphill, still silent. By the time I reached the small clearing near the summit, the sky was deepening to navy, stars beginning to appear. I could see the glow now, weaving between the trees like a river of color, but always keeping a slight distance ahead of me. My compass refused to settle, needle jittering as if struggling against some unseen force. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and crouched behind a boulder, debating whether to call Jenna or someone. My hands were shaking and my breath came in short bursts. The glow paused again, low among the saplings, then brightened slightly, like it was acknowledging me. I told myself it couldn't be intelligent, couldn't know I was there. But the way it moved, the rhythm of the pulsing, it felt deliberate. I stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt longer, watching it ascend. Then the pulsing slowed, dimmed, and for a brief moment, it was just a faint gleam. I made a quiet decision to head back down. Every step was tense, like breaking some fragile boundary. I didn't dare look over my shoulder, afraid it would follow. Halfway down, the glow vanished entirely. No trace, no residual light, nothing but the normal forest shadows. The compass finally stilled, needle pointing true north again. I let out a long, slow breath, gripping my pack tighter, willing my heartbeat to slow. When I got back to the trailhead, the sky was mostly dark. The parking lot was empty, cars frosted from the night chill. I tried to tell myself I imagined it, that the spinning compass and the pulsing light were coincidences. But even as I drove home, the memory lingered. The way the light moved, the way the air felt different near it, the steady, unnatural glow threading through the trees. At home, Jenna asked about the hike. I said it was fine, a little foggy and quiet. I didn't mention the compass or the glow. I couldn't quite explain it, not in a way that sounded sane. A few days later, I hiked a different trail, one I knew well. Compass worked perfectly, no unusual lights. But every so often, in the corner of my vision, I thought I saw a faint pulse of bluish light between the trees. When I blinked, it was gone. I still hike those trails, sometimes alone, sometimes with Jenna. I've never seen that glow again, not like that night. But I keep an old compass in my pack, and sometimes, just for a moment, I check it. Needle wavers ever so slightly, and I swear I feel the forest hold its breath, like something just beyond the edge of my sight is watching, moving steadily uphill, silently, waiting. I had been driving home from a late delivery down the back roads outside Marquette, Michigan, the night thick with snow, and that heavy, wet kind of cold that seeps through a truck's insulation. The radio was just static most of the way, a little mix of snow and old AM stations, until it settled into a low hum that didn't match anything I recognized. It was steady, almost like a tone, or a series of tones repeating at regular intervals, too even to be interference from the power lines. I stopped at the side of the road near a bend overlooking a ridge of pines, figuring I'd pull over for a minute. The heater was struggling against the cold, and the snow had started to stick to the windshield wipers even at full speed. That's when I noticed it, a pale light hovering just above the tree line, far off in the distance. It didn't move like a plane or a helicopter. No blinking, no engine noise. It didn't descend or rise suddenly, just held its position, moving slowly sideways, like it was drifting on something denser than air but heavier than wind. My first thought was someone else out on the ridge, maybe a snowmobiler with a headlight, but it was too high for that, and the motion didn't make sense. I turned the truck toward it, foot easing on the gas. The light didn't change speed or angle. It wasn't approaching or retreating. It just drifted. I flicked the headlights on and off, figuring maybe I'd get a better look. Nothing. The shape didn't resolve into anything familiar. It stayed a single, soft glow, slightly yellowish, like a streetlight turned down to a faint haze. The tones on the radio stayed steady, nothing like music or a broadcast. It was low, almost a vibration you could feel in your chest more than hear, and I realized my hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter without me noticing. The truck's heater clicked as it cycled, but the tones didn't change with the engine, didn't interfere with any of the truck's electronics. I tried to rationalize it. Power lines, a distant lighthouse, maybe some reflection off the snow. I even thought it could be a balloon caught in the cold air. But none of that matched what I was seeing. The light drifted horizontally over the ridge, slowly, deliberately. My eyes kept darting back to it, and I felt this creeping sense that it was aware of me watching, though I knew that made no sense. I eased the truck closer to the ridge, careful not to skid on the snow-covered asphalt. The hum on the radio seemed louder now, like it was resonating through the cab. I opened the window slightly, expecting maybe the wind or snow to mask something. Instead, it was silence, thick and empty, apart from that low tone. No engines, no birds, nothing. As I watched, the light tilted slightly, not in the way a helicopter might bank, but like it was adjusting its orientation midair. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed because everything else in the world seemed frozen under the snow's glow. My truck felt small, ordinary, and absurdly fragile against the stillness. After a few minutes, I reached for my phone to take a picture. The screen flickered, not from my hands shaking, but as if the device itself was struggling. By the time I raised it, the light had shifted slightly farther down the ridge, still slow, still deliberate. The camera's flash didn't trigger. The image came out dark with only the faintest blur where the glow had been. I lowered the phone and tried a mental checklist. No planes, no distant streetlights, no balloons, no animals with reflective tags. Nothing fit. The light drifted, and I felt this odd tension, like time had contracted around the ridge. My hands were numb, despite the heater, heart beating harder with every glance. Then, just as suddenly as I'd noticed the glow, it stopped, hovered in place. I blinked, thinking maybe I had imagined the lateral drift. The tones on the radio grew just a little sharper, a subtle pitch shift that didn't resolve into anything recognizable. I leaned closer to the dash, trying to figure out if the truck's electronics were feeding back some kind of interference. But everything checked out. Gauges normal, engine idle steady, heat on, windshield wipers off. I realized I had no idea how long I'd been there. Snow continued falling softly, muffling the world, but time had started to feel strange, like the minutes had stretched, pulled by the presence of that light. My mind tried to fill in the gaps, tried to rationalize the impossible, but each explanation seemed smaller and less likely than the last. Eventually, I pulled the truck back onto the main road, carefully, keeping my headlights dimmed so as not to wash out the glow. The light began moving again, not in a sudden sprint, but like it was gliding to keep pace with me, still too high for any vehicle I could identify. It matched my speed, adjusting its pace with an almost conscious awareness of where I was. The tones on the radio shifted again. I could almost feel them in my teeth now, a vibration I couldn't place. It wasn't loud, not like an alarm, just present, like it existed outside normal sound, humming inside the cab and behind my eyes at once. I passed the ridge and the light remained visible for a few more minutes. At some point, I glanced back over my shoulder. It had disappeared. No drift, no gradual fade, nothing. Just gone. The snow kept falling, the trees moved normally in the wind, and the radio returned to static. I kept driving home, the hum still faintly ringing in my chest, checking over my shoulder every so often. My neighborhood appeared normal, houses dark, except for a few lamps. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the snowflakes were clinging to the truck's windshield, but there was no sign of the light anywhere. Inside, I shut the door, shook the snow from my jacket, and checked the truck one more time. Nothing abnormal. No frost patterns beyond the usual, no scorch marks, no unusual residue. Misty, the neighbor's cat that sometimes visits, wandered through the yard, completely indifferent. I've thought about that night a lot since. I've looked for explanations. Lanterns, drones, distant aircraft, optical illusions in the snow, even some trick of light through the clouds. Nothing fits. The steady tones, the slow, deliberate drift, the abrupt vanishing. None of it has a comfortable explanation. I don't talk about it much, mostly because it sounds ridiculous when I do. But sometimes driving home late and snow beginning to fall, I glance up over the tree line and remember that slow, hovering glow and the low hum inside my chest. And even knowing nothing happened beyond the ridge, I feel that same tension, like the world is just a little thinner in that spot, and time stretches in ways I can't explain. I drove my route the next night, and the night after, nothing, just snow, dark trees, the hum of the truck engine. But for me, the memory is still there, heavy in the quiet, a presence I can't name, a question I can't answer, hovering just beyond the ridge. I was somewhere between mile marker 112 and 113 on State Route 95, heading home from a job site in Kingman, when I first noticed the headlights. It was late, maybe 11:30, and the desert around me was pitch black except for the faint glow of the moon over the mountains. The highway was dead straight for miles. My rig was making the usual hum, heater on low, coffee cup half empty in the cup holder. Then, out of the dark, a pair of headlights appeared. At first, I thought it was another truck, someone catching up, but it was far away, so far that I figured it couldn't reach me for at least 20 minutes. The headlights didn't flicker or change. They just moved forward, slow and steady. I checked the mirrors. No one behind me. Not that it mattered too much. The road was deserted. I figured I was just tired, imagining it. The desert can play tricks, especially at night. But 20 minutes passed, maybe more, and the lights stayed the same distance ahead. I tapped my fingers on the wheel, tried to focus on the road. When I glanced again, they weren't on the asphalt. I squinted, adjusted the visor. The lights had lifted a few feet off the ground, maybe more, drifting slowly like a pair of lanterns caught in a breeze. The truck behind me, or whatever it was, wasn't making any noise. No engine, no wind, nothing. Just that glow, perfectly parallel to the road. My stomach sank a little. I slowed, keeping my distance. Maybe I was seeing someone experimenting with a drone or some kind of art installation out here. Still, the lights weren't blinking. They weren't swaying with the wind. They didn't seem tethered to anything. I tried to look for shapes, something to identify, but all I could see was two bright spots, low in the air. My rig's radio started picking up static, low and steady. It wasn't interference from my phone or the heater. It was a tone, a faint hum that felt like it was vibrating through the metal frame of the truck. I muttered, "Okay, that's new," but didn't want to stop. Not here, not alone in the desert at this hour. I reached for the CB, figured maybe someone else had seen it. No response. Nothing but static. The lights were still ahead, drifting silently. I flicked my high beams on and off. No reflection, no vehicle silhouette. It wasn't bouncing off anything, wasn't on the asphalt. I tried to calculate speed, distance. If it had been a car, it would have caught me long ago. If it had been a drone, it would have flickered or lost stability. None of that happened. It just kept floating along, perfectly aligned with the road, like it had a path carved out in the air. At one point, I saw the headlights move slightly to the right, then back. My pulse jumped. I wasn't imagining it. Whatever it was, it seemed to be aware I was following, though not reacting aggressively, just existing in the same space. I passed a small wash on the right and tried to catch a better angle. The lights seemed to drift a little further away from the road, rising higher. Slowly, imperceptibly, I gripped the wheel tight, stared straight ahead. Then, in a motion too smooth for anything mechanical, they lifted maybe 30-40 feet off the ground, still side by side, and continued drifting straight up. No sound, no reflection in the desert sand, just a steady rise until they were nothing more than two tiny points in the black sky, and then gone. I blinked a few times, shook my head. Maybe it was a trick of the eyes, something with the moonlight. But my rig's radio still had that low hum. I tried tuning it, turning it off, shaking the dial. Nothing. The tone persisted, faint but steady, like it was coming from somewhere nearby, vibrating in the truck itself. I slowed to a crawl, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. Nothing. The hum eventually faded, almost imperceptibly, until my rig was just quiet again. I drove the remaining miles with high beams on, scanning every curve, every shadow, but the highway stayed empty. No other cars, no lights, nothing. By the time I hit Kingman, I had to stop at a gas station. Needed caffeine, needed someone to acknowledge that the desert wasn't normally this empty, this quiet. I told the attendant about the lights, my voice a little too loud. He raised his eyebrows, nodded like he'd heard stranger things at 2 a.m., and moved on. Didn't ask questions. Back at my apartment, I checked the dashcam footage. Nothing. Not a single frame showing headlights in the sky. Just me, the rig, and a long stretch of black road. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the lights hadn't behaved like anything I knew. No engine, no noise, no drag of air. Just drifted up, and that was it. For a while, I kept driving that route at night, thinking maybe it would happen again. Nothing. Not a flicker, not a shadow, not a tone on the radio. Yet, sometimes, late at night when the highway is empty and the wind picks up across the asphalt, I swear I can see a faint glimmer above the horizon, just for a second, as if the lights are testing the road again, silent and weightless. I haven't told anyone else. People would assume I'm exaggerating. But the desert was quiet, the road was straight, and I know what I saw. I know how it moved. I can still feel the faint vibration of that hum in my ribs when I close my eyes and think about it, like the memory of something that doesn't want to be explained. I woke up to the crowing of my old rooster, though it wasn't quite dawn yet, probably closer to 4:30 a.m. The sky was still dark, and the usual cold wind had that damp edge that makes the barn smell sharper, like hay mixed with frost. I rubbed my eyes and swung open the barn door, expecting to see the usual chaos of chickens wandering, the goats nudging each other, the cows shifting and sighing, but everything was still, too still. Every animal in the barn was frozen, heads turned in the same direction, eyes reflecting whatever little light came through the cracks in the walls. I could hear the soft shuffle of my boots on the wooden floor, and even that sounded loud. I paused, squinting through the dimness, trying to make sense of it. Usually someone, usually the old milk cow, Betsy, would be moving or groaning or nudging the others awake. Nothing. I stepped outside. The cornfield stretched in front of me, rows of stalks swaying faintly in the breeze. And then I saw it. A pale oval, hanging motionless just above the tallest rows of corn. It wasn't like any moon or star. There wasn't a halo or flicker, just a soft, steady glow. It was low enough that I could almost make out the top of the corn behind it, but high enough that it wasn't resting on anything. No sound, no movement. Nothing but the animals, frozen, and the oval. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks, maybe catching the reflection of a distant farmhouse light. I shook my head and whispered, "What the hell?" to nobody. The glow didn't move. I took a cautious step forward, and the chickens didn't so much as blink. My boots crunched the frost-hardened earth. I ran through the usual checks in my head. Electricity? No, I didn't have anything running out here, nothing plugged in that could shine like that. Drone? Not at that height and not that steady. I crouched, squinting through the frost-tipped corn stalks. The light seemed to shift slightly with the wind, almost imperceptibly, but not like it was floating. It was like the air itself bent around it. I went back to the barn, trying to get a better look. The goats were all facing the same way, their ears twitching in rhythm, but none of them made a sound. I stepped closer to the cows. Betsy's huge brown eyes were fixed on the oval. I swear her breathing was shallow, but she didn't move. It felt like the entire barn had gone silent just for that thing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was blank. No notifications, no calls, nothing. I tried turning on the flashlight, half expecting it to flicker or go out, but it stayed steady. I shone it toward the field. The oval didn't react, didn't flicker, it didn't change size or brightness. I leaned against the barn post, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would echo across the field. I watched the oval for maybe 10 minutes, though it could have been longer. Time felt stretched, unnatural. Then I noticed the wind had picked up, though barely, and the animals started shifting slightly, but still all facing the same direction. The chickens shuffled, Betsy shifted her weight, but the glow didn't move. And then something even stranger. I could hear a soft hum, just a vibration in the air. Not like electricity, not like a motor, more like a low-frequency resonance you feel in your chest rather than hear with your ears. I stepped back toward the barn door, thinking maybe if I got my truck, I could shine a bigger light, see what was really there. The hum seemed to increase slightly as I did, almost like it was aware. The oval tilted slightly, though it didn't move from its spot over the cornfield. I froze. Then the hum stopped. The animals blinked and started moving, not suddenly, but like waking from a long trance. Chickens scattered, goats bleated, cows snorted. The barn was alive again. I looked back at the field, and the oval had vanished, just gone. The corn was still, the frost glittering under the moonlight, nothing in the sky except the stars. I ran to the truck, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weather balloon, a reflection of some distant city lights, a trick of the early morning fog. But it hadn't been foggy enough to distort the light that much. And the hum, that vibration in my chest that disappeared as suddenly as it appeared? I had no explanation. I drove toward the highway, not fast, but careful, looking back over my shoulder at the cornfield. Nothing. Only the quiet of the desert morning creeping into the hills, the rooster calling again somewhere down the way. My phone still acted like it was off for the world. No signal, no light. I didn't try to call anyone. When I got home, I poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to write it down in my journal. Writing helped calm me, gave me something to focus on besides the lingering hum I could almost still feel. The barn, the animals, that light, it all seemed possible and impossible at the same time. Later, when I checked the barn again in the morning, everything seemed normal. Corn stalks swayed in the breeze, chickens clucked, cows moved about. No signs of disturbance, no tracks, no footprints, or anything unusual. The only thing that remained was the memory of the quiet, the hum, and the way everything had stopped, frozen, facing the same direction as if waiting for something. Even now, weeks later, I can't explain it. I drive past that field sometimes at night, flashlight in the cab, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing ever shows again, not like that. But occasionally I swear I can feel the hum beneath my ribs, soft, steady, just beyond sight. And I remember the animals, frozen, staring at a light that shouldn't have been there. I was crouched behind a fallen oak, the early evening fog settling in low between the pines when I first saw it. A pale, pulsing glow, weaving between the trees maybe 100 yards out. I froze, barely breathing, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and my own heartbeat. The light didn't move like a person walking or a flashlight beam. It danced, weaving in smooth curves, sometimes slowing, sometimes speeding up, never touching the ground. At first, I thought it might be another hunter. Someone out too late, maybe with a small lantern, but the motion didn't match anything human. It slipped silently through the woods, no crunch of twigs or brush, just this soft, almost liquid glow. I tried to track it with my eyes, adjusting my position to get a better look, but the fog made everything blurry. I lifted my rifle slowly, scope first, trying to get a closer view. That's when it vanished. One moment it was there, weaving just above the underbrush. The next, nothing. The space it had occupied seemed empty, but the fog hung heavy and my pulse started to hammer against my ribs. I lowered the rifle, scanning in a tight circle, ears straining for anything unusual. For a minute, nothing. Then I noticed the sound, or maybe the lack of it. All the usual forest noises had gone quiet. Birds that normally called as the sun set, frogs along the creek, even the wind through the pine needles, all gone. Complete silence, heavier than any night I'd ever spent out here. I felt exposed, like I was the only living thing in a still painting. I moved slowly, rifle raised, trying to get closer to where I'd last seen the glow. As I stepped over a root, a small flicker caught my eye. Just a glint of white light bouncing off something wet on a branch. I froze, trying to make sense of it, then realized it wasn't the same as before. It was static. A reflection maybe, but it made the hairs on my neck stand up. I kept moving, careful to stay in the shadows, following the direction I thought the light had gone. After 10 minutes, I stumbled onto a clearing. Nothing but fog and pines, and my flashlight beam cutting a narrow swath in front of me. I checked my watch. About 20 minutes had passed since I first saw the glow. That seemed off. I could have sworn only a few minutes had gone by, but the sky had darkened further, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. I leaned against a tree, trying to calm myself, when I noticed something odd. Tiny points of light, almost like embers, flickered in the fog ahead. They weren't moving like fireflies. They stayed in place, then blinked out one by one. I counted 3 before my flashlight battery buzzed low and dimmed, forcing me to switch it to a weaker setting. That's when I felt it. Not behind me, not to the side, but a sense of being watched. Nothing I could see, just awareness, as if something was tracking my movements carefully. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, feeling the weight of it steady my nerves, and started moving back toward the path. As I did, the fog thickened unnaturally, and the faint pulsing light reappeared for a brief second between two thick pines. I froze, scope up again, but as soon as I tried to focus, it vanished. The silence pressed in closer, and I realized I couldn't hear even the usual nighttime creaks of the forest floor under my own boots. I kept walking, slow, deliberate, staying alert. My mind raced through explanations. A strange reflection of the moon, bioluminescent insects, some kind of trick of fog and branches, but none of it fit. The way the light had moved, the absence of sound, the pressure of being watched, all wrong for anything natural I knew. By the time I got back to the main logging trail, I was shaking, but I told myself to stay rational. Maybe someone else was out here with a laser pointer or some toy. Maybe I just imagined parts of it, my eyes playing tricks in the fog. I even laughed quietly to myself, trying to break the tension. I kept checking behind me as I hiked back to the truck. Everything looked normal, shadows long and straight, fog thick but ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the light, whatever it was, had followed me in some way. I slowed every time a branch snapped underfoot, listening, expecting, but nothing. The truck came into view, headlights dim in the fog. I approached cautiously, scanning the tree line one last time. Nothing moved. I unlocked the door and got inside, leaving the engine off at first, just listening. The silence outside pressed against the glass, heavy and deliberate, like the woods were holding their breath. When I started the engine, the vibration of the idling motor seemed loud in contrast to the quiet. I looked in the rearview mirror at the fog-shrouded trees and couldn't see a thing, but I had the sensation that the glow was still out there somewhere, just beyond the edge of my vision. Driving out of the woods, I kept glancing at the side mirrors and over the roof, half expecting to see it again, weaving between the trees. But the path back was empty, the fog thinning, the forest returning to ordinary sounds. Birds called from the treetops, a distant branch cracked, a small owl hooted. Normal again. When I reached my driveway, headlights cutting a path across the snow-dusted yard, I hesitated before stepping inside. My dog barked from the living room, breaking the tension, and I laughed, though it was shaky. I told myself it was just the fog, the fatigue, maybe a mix of imagination and stress from a long day hunting. I still think about it. Sometimes when I'm hiking, or even just sitting on the porch, I swear I see a flicker in the woods, subtle, just at the edge of sight. Not constant, not obvious, but enough to make me glance over my shoulder and feel that same watchful pressure. I've gone back to the woods since then. I bring a friend sometimes, lights, radios, even extra rifles. Nothing shows up in the same way. The fog is normal, the trees sound like themselves, and I feel almost foolish remembering that night. But every so often, in the right misty conditions, I catch a pulse of white moving against the dark trunks and my stomach tightens. And I know, in a way I can't explain, that whatever it was, it's still out there, weaving silently through the trees. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to a sound that didn't make sense. A low, constant hum vibrating through the floorboards and into my chest. I figured it was probably some appliance acting up, or maybe the neighbor's old generator kicking on. But the sound was different, steady, almost too smooth, and somehow unnatural. I sat up in bed, listening. The hum didn't come from inside the house. It seemed to hover outside, pressing against the walls and windows. I nudged my wife, Laura, who groaned and rolled over, but when I told her to listen, she stopped moving. Her face was pale in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "That's weird," she whispered. "Yeah, it's like a drone or something," I said, but the sound didn't have that whiny, mechanical tone. It was smoother, almost like the sky itself was vibrating. I got out of bed and pulled on a sweatshirt, motioning for Laura to follow. Our son, Danny, was still asleep in his room, and I didn't want to wake him unless I had to. The porch door creaked as I opened it, and the cold air hit me. That's when I saw it. A faint glow, low in the sky above our backyard. It moved slowly, almost gliding, and the light wasn't sharp or directional like a spotlight. It was soft, spreading evenly, like fog made of pale white green. I froze, not sure if I should call out to Laura. She stepped up beside me, her hand brushing mine. We both just stared. The glow moved across the sky, tracing a path over our street. I could see the outlines of the neighbors' houses below, all dark except for a few night lights. The glow didn't blink or flash, it just drifted, silent, except for the hum that seemed to grow slightly louder as it passed overhead. I tried to convince myself it was a plane, or maybe a helicopter with a weird reflection, but nothing fit. It didn't make any sound like a motor, no rotor beat, nothing that could be traced to ordinary aircraft. And its speed, it was slow, deliberate, almost like it was studying the neighborhood. I grabbed my phone, thinking I could at least take a video. As soon as I unlocked it, the glow shifted slightly, almost as if it knew I was looking. I lifted the camera, zooming in, but all I could get was a fuzzy light against the black sky. My thumb hovered over the record button, unsure if I wanted to capture it or just watch. Then, in what felt like a single blink, it was gone. No flash, no trail, nothing. The hum continued for another few seconds, then faded completely. Laura let out a soft breath. Did it just disappear? She asked. I nodded, though my mouth felt dry. I stepped off the porch, scanning the sky. Stars were back in their usual positions, no hint of movement, no unnatural light anywhere. The air felt heavier somehow, like it had been charged with something I couldn't identify. I checked the backyard, walking slowly toward the fence line. The grass was wet from the early morning dew, and every sound, the wind in the trees, the distant barking of a dog, sounded normal. I kept glancing up, expecting the glow to reappear. It never did. After a few minutes, I went back inside and closed the door, locking it more out of habit than fear. Laura sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring blankly out the window. I poured some water for myself and leaned against the counter, thinking through what had happened. Nothing in my life prepared me for something like that. I wanted a rational explanation. Light reflection from a plane, a drone, maybe even a weather balloon. But the movement, the silence, the hum, none of it fit. Danny stirred in his sleep, and I felt a sudden urge to check the bedroom. Nothing unusual. He was curled up under his blanket, dreaming. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the quiet house. No hum, no glowing light, nothing. Just the ordinary creaks and sighs of a home settling. The rest of the night passed without incident. I kept getting up to glance outside, checking windows and the porch, thinking I might see that glow again. I never did. By the time morning came, the sky was gray and overcast, birds calling as usual, and the air smelled of wet grass and frost. I half expected someone else to mention strange lights or sounds, but the neighborhood was quiet, normal. Even now I think about it. The hum wasn't just loud. It resonated in a way that felt deliberate, like it was directed at us. And the glow, how it moved, how it vanished, it wasn't anything I can identify. I've gone back out onto the porch at night since then, staring at the sky, waiting, hoping for some sign that I wasn't imagining it. Nothing, but the memory lingers, heavy and strange, like the hum still echoes somewhere just beyond hearing. Laura tries to shrug it off, says it was probably some weird electrical storm effect or a distant helicopter, but I know what I saw. It wasn't anything ordinary, and it wasn't here to be ignored. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night air presses against the windows, I swear I can hear the faintest hum in the distance, almost like a reminder that it's still out there. I don't talk about it much. Friends would probably joke, dismiss it, call it sleep-deprived imagination. But I know what happened that night. And every time I step onto that porch after dark, I check the sky first, because even if it never comes back, the memory of that glow and that hum is still very real. It's the kind of thing that changes the way you see ordinary nights forever. I'd been fishing that night on Miller's Pond for a while, waiting for the crappie to bite. The air was calm, almost unnaturally still, and the surface of the water looked like glass under the dim moonlight. My truck was parked at the far end of the dirt road, engine off, lights out, leaving only the soft rustle of the wind through the pines. I liked it this way, quiet and empty, the kind of night where you feel like the world belongs only to you. I'd cast my line a couple of times and was leaning back against the cooler, watching the water, when I noticed something strange. A pale oval reflected on the surface, just above my bobber. It wasn't the moon, that was to my left, behind some trees. It hovered there, faint, a muted glow that seemed to shimmer slightly against the dark water. I froze, thinking maybe it was a fish, some phosphorescent reflection, anything normal. But it didn't move like that. It stayed perfectly still, just floating over the water like it was looking at me. I squinted, trying to see through the darkness. Then I raised my head slowly, thinking I'd catch the source in the trees or above the ridge behind the pond. My stomach tightened. It was right there above me, an oval shape, pale and dim, maybe 30 feet up. No sound. No whirring, no wings, nothing. It didn't shine like a lamp, but it lit the area under it in a subtle, diffuse way, just enough that I could see the ripples of the water and the outline of my rod. And I swear I didn't breathe for a moment. My hands gripped the rod, knuckles white, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. The air was cold, and my jacket felt heavier somehow, like the night itself had grown dense around me. I tried to tell myself it was a reflection off the water, a trick of my eyes. I even blinked a couple of times to reset it, but when I looked up again, the oval was still there, hovering above, completely motionless, then just vanished. No sound, no movement, just nothing. I leaned back, heart pounding, listening. The pond was still. The wind barely moved. Only the occasional splash of a fish breaking the water, nothing else. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off, but it didn't feel like anything I could explain. I cast again, half hoping for a bite to distract myself, but my focus was gone. Every rustle in the trees made me tense. Every shadow on the water looked like it could be that pale oval again. After a while, I started packing up. My hands were unsteady as I coiled the line. The pond looked normal now, dark and quiet, the moonlight reflecting off the small ripples. I didn't see the oval again, but a sense of being watched stayed with me, prickling along my neck and arms. When I got back to the truck, I checked the area around the shoreline. Nothing unusual, just the mud, the reeds, and the faint outline of the road behind the pines. Driving home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following. The headlights cut through the fog that had settled in the valley, the same fog that made everything look different, strange. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the scattered lights of distant houses. The radio was off. I didn't want noise. My mind kept replaying the oval, drifting silently above me. I tried to remember the exact color, the shape, the way it held in the air, but the memory kept slipping like smoke. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were still trembling a little. I left the truck running for a second, staring out at the dark trees across the street. Nothing moved. My dog barked once in the neighbor's yard, then stopped. I went inside and shut the door, locking it automatically, almost reflexively. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and kept staring out the window at the backyard, half expecting the oval to appear again. It didn't. I tried telling my brother about it later, and he said it was probably a plane or a reflection of some kind. I even told myself the same thing that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my mind. But planes don't hover in silence, not that low. Not with that light that isn't exactly light, and reflections don't just vanish midair. The next morning, I went back to Miller's Pond, thinking maybe I'd catch a glimpse of something that would make sense, maybe a trick of the fog or light. I didn't see anything unusual, but I noticed the water looked different, like it had been disturbed overnight, even though the wind had been calm. Small ripples across the surface, but no fish, no wake, just the water, and the memory of that pale oval floating above it. Weeks later, I still think about it sometimes when I go fishing. I take a flashlight out there at night, shine it across the water, but I never see the oval again. Sometimes, though, when the night is completely still, I swear I feel that same weight in the air, the same hush, like the pond itself is holding something back, waiting. And for a few seconds, I can see it again, just as I did that first night, hovering silently, pale and strange, then gone, leaving only the water and the fog and the silence. I've stopped trying to explain it. I don't know what it was, but I know it was there above me, and for a moment the world felt different. Lighter and heavier at the same time, as if it had remembered me too. I'd been driving the back roads outside of Eureka, heading back from a weekend with my cousin in the Redwoods. It was late, well past sunset, and the fog had started rolling in, thick enough that my headlights barely cut through it. I had my phone GPS on, but the signal kept cutting in and out, so I decided to pull over on a gravel turnout to double check the map. The moment I killed the engine, the quiet hit me. No birds, no wind, just the low hum of the tires on gravel and the occasional whip of moisture from the fog settling on the leaves. I flipped the map open on the passenger seat, squinting at the dim light from my dashboard. Then I noticed the headlights dimming. Not flickering, not uneven, just less bright. I leaned forward, trying to adjust the dimmer, thinking maybe the battery was acting up, but the lights stayed the same. I glanced up at the windshield reflexively. That's when I saw it. A soft glow, faint but distinct, moving behind the tree line along the ridge a few hundred feet away. I froze, my hand halfway to the dash. The color was hard to pin down, somewhere between white and pale yellow, like an old fluorescent bulb but diffused, almost hazy around the edges. It wasn't high in the sky. It didn't move like a plane or a car. It slid slowly, deliberately, along the tree line, almost as if it were following the shape of the hills. I blinked a few times, sure my eyes were playing tricks on me. Fog can do strange things with light, but the glow didn't shift or break apart. It was steady, slow, deliberate. I leaned closer to the windshield, trying to see if it was something on the ground, maybe a hunter's flashlight bouncing off the fog, but there was no movement beneath the tree line. Nothing. The fog was too thick to see much, just the faint outline of the trees and the glow gliding above it like it had weight, like it belonged there. I put the map down and stepped out, keeping my hand on the car door. The air was cold and damp, soaking my jacket instantly. The sound of my boots on gravel felt loud in the quiet. I scanned the ridge, heart racing, but the glow had shifted slightly, moving horizontally, slowly, without a sound. No hum, no flicker, just a presence. I pulled my phone out to take a picture, thinking that would make sense of it, but the screen dimmed too quickly to get a proper shot. After a few minutes, I considered driving away. I didn't want to, but something in me wanted the car between me and that light. I got back in and started the engine. The headlights brightened again, as if nothing had happened. But when I looked up through the windshield, the glow was still there, drifting, slow, patient. I took a deep breath, tried to tell myself it was a reflection from something behind me. But there was nothing on the road, no approaching cars, no street lights, just me, the trees, and that light. I started driving slowly, keeping the glow in my side mirror. It stayed near the tree line, moving parallel to the road, and every time I glanced at it, it seemed to shift slightly closer to the road like it was tracking me. My mind was racing with everything logical. Reflection, phosphorescence, a hunting light, maybe even a weather balloon, but none of it fit. It wasn't bouncing or flickering, didn't have a source I could identify, just there, gliding over the ridge. About 10 minutes later, the road curved and I lost sight of it for a moment. I breathed a little easier, telling myself maybe it had stayed back on the ridge, or maybe my eyes were tricking me. But then it appeared in the side mirror again, further along, just at the edge of the tree line, keeping pace without changing speed. It didn't climb, didn't descend, didn't break into anything recognizable. It just existed. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I considered calling someone, anyone, but the signal was gone. I debated pulling over again, but the thought of being out there in the fog with that moving light close enough to feel my heartbeat made me uneasy. I pressed on, driving slower than normal, just trying to get back to familiar roads. After another stretch, the trees opened up and the ridge dropped off. I glanced back in the rearview mirror and the glow had stopped. It wasn't there anymore. No sudden departure, no acceleration into the sky, just gone. I blinked, almost expecting it to reappear, but the fog behind the ridge looked normal, empty. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, but my chest still felt tight, like the air itself had been holding tension for the last half hour. The rest of the drive home was quiet. I kept looking back in the mirrors, expecting a flicker, a glimpse, anything, but there was nothing. I pulled into my driveway, the porch light cutting through the fog that had rolled down into the neighborhood. Everything looked normal. My wife was at the window, waving, and the dog barked. I turned off the engine, trying to shake the lingering unease. I spent the night thinking about that light. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to figure out what I had actually seen. A reflection? Impossible. A plane or drone? Too slow, too low, too quiet. I considered stress, fatigue from the long drive, my brain filling in gaps. Maybe. But it felt more real than that. Something that shouldn't exist in that space, moving in a deliberate, silent way. I haven't gone back down that stretch of road at night since. I've driven it in daylight, and it looks ordinary, completely normal. But I still remember the way the fog smelled that night, the way the headlights dimmed, and that glow gliding over the tree line. I can't explain it, and I don't even try to anymore. I just know I saw something I shouldn't have, and it stayed in my mind long after it disappeared. Even now, months later, when the fog rolls in at night and I drive past that area, I can't help glancing toward the ridge, half expecting that pale glow to drift silently along the trees again, keeping pace with the world in a way that doesn't make sense. I was halfway through my usual morning run when the fog rolled in thick enough to make it hard to see the road ahead. It wasn't unusual for this time of year. The valley I live in tends to trap moisture overnight, and by 6 a.m. it's often like running through a cloud. My shoes squished against the damp pavement, and the air smelled of wet grass and dirt. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. The street lamps along the side of the road were just dim halos through the mist. I was listening to the rhythm of my breathing and the faint splash of my steps in the puddles, just zoning out. Then I caught a glint above the power lines that run parallel to the road. I stopped mid-stride, squinting through the fog. 3 small lights, evenly spaced, were hovering maybe 50 feet above the lines. They weren't blinking or moving like streetlights. They just hung there, like they were deliberately waiting for me to notice. The fog made their edges diffuse, softening the brightness, and there was no sound at all. Not a hum, not a whine, nothing. I started running again, thinking maybe I was seeing reflections from some distant car headlights or a plane obscured by fog, but as I moved forward, the lights didn't shift relative to me. They stayed where they were, and then just as slowly as I approached, they began to drift apart. One moved slightly left, another to the right, and the third straight up. Their paths were deliberate, almost choreographed. I slowed to a stop again, my heart picking up pace and my skin prickled with that uneasy feeling that something isn't right. I pulled my jacket tighter and my breath fogged in front of me. My first thought was drones, some local kid messing around, but even then the silence didn't make sense. Drones buzz, and these were just quiet, absolutely quiet. And the movement, the smooth, coordinated way they separated, it didn't feel mechanical or random. I kept my eyes on them as I moved closer to the intersection, and that's when they started blinking out. Not one by one in a sequence that made sense, but individually, almost like someone switched them off in a random order. The left one went first, the middle last, and the right one somewhere in between. A second they were there, the next, nothing. And just like that, the sky looked normal again, the fog just fog, and the morning light hadn't even broken through yet. I stayed where I was for a long minute, heart pounding, scanning the tree line and power lines. Nothing. No sound, no movement, just the usual fog and distant cars starting to stir. I started walking back toward home, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection off the wet wires, anything. But something about how deliberate the movement had been stayed with me. As I got closer to my neighborhood, the fog thinned a little, and I could see familiar houses and the lamplight spilling onto driveways. Still, I kept looking up, half expecting them to reappear, and part of me worried I'd see them drifting again, but they didn't. When I finally got inside, my stomach was tight, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I told my roommate about it over coffee, and he laughed it off as pre-dawn imagination, but I didn't feel like laughing. The rest of the morning was ordinary. Fog burned off, cars went by, birds started their morning calls, nothing abnormal. But the image of those 3 lights drifting apart, perfectly synchronized, stayed with me. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe reflections off distant planes, maybe a light fixture somewhere I didn't know about, but none of it fit. The silence, the movement, the blinking out one by one. It didn't match anything I've ever experienced. Over the next few days, I found myself avoiding that stretch of road in the early morning. I ran later than usual, after the sun was up, just to avoid that section. I checked local news and online forums for reports of lights, drones, anything unusual, but there was nothing. No one else had seen it. Or if they had, they didn't talk about it. A week later, I went back, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that I had imagined it or misjudged some lights in the fog. Everything looked normal, mundane even. Street lamps, power lines, puddles reflecting the gray sky. But I kept looking up, half expecting to see them again. And that's when I noticed the fog behaves differently in certain spots along the lines. It curls unnaturally, almost like it's thicker in a way that's hard to describe. Not a shape, not a shadow, just heavier, denser, as if something invisible had passed through and left it slightly altered. I ran past that spot faster than usual, my mind racing. I've gone back at night since then, sometimes with a friend, sometimes alone, and nothing ever happened again. No lights, no hum, no strange fog, just ordinary, silent mornings. But sometimes, even months later, when the fog comes in thick and the streets are empty, I swear I can feel that same pressure in the air, the same sense of being watched, and I glance up automatically, expecting those 3 lights to be back, hovering quietly above the power lines, waiting for me to notice. I don't talk about it much, mostly because no one would believe me, and I don't even try to make sense of it anymore. But every time I lace up my shoes before sunrise, I check that stretch of road first. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear the fog is thicker than it should be, like it's holding something in the air that shouldn't be there. Something that isn't a bird, isn't a plane, isn't anything I've ever encountered before. And I know that if I look up, I might see it again. I stepped out from the break room, cigarette in hand, feeling the cool night air hit my face. The warehouse lot was empty except for the faint hum of the freezers inside. Night shift breaks were always quiet, and I liked it that way. The sky was overcast, low clouds reflecting the city's orange glow in a dull, hazy light. I leaned against the brick wall, took a drag, and blew it out slowly. That's when the lights went out. I mean, everything. Security lights over the loading dock, the ones lining the lot, snapped off at once. The sudden darkness made me jump back a step, my cigarette tip glowing like a tiny star in the blackness. Normally, a power flicker wasn't a big deal. I'd check the circuit, wait for the lights to click back on. But nothing happened. Not a flicker, not a buzz, just silence and darkness. Then I noticed it. Above the lot, maybe 50 feet up, a dim white shape was moving. At first, I thought it was a drone, but it wasn't blinking, and it moved too smoothly without any sound. My head tilted back to follow it, cigarette smoke curling around me, and the shape glided across the sky like it was floating on a current of air. No sound, no lights, nothing, just a soft, pale form drifting away from the warehouse. I flicked the cigarette into the gravel, heart thudding in my chest. My first thought was rational. Reflection, lens flare, maybe some streetlight bouncing weirdly off clouds, but it was too precise. It had shape, presence. I squinted, trying to make out any edges, but it stayed featureless. Just a white, elongated blur moving slower than any bird or plane I'd ever seen. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, hoping for a flashlight or a camera, but my screen was black. No signal, no power. The usual little things that ground you in reality felt absent. I considered running back inside, but my legs were stiff from standing all night, and some part of me didn't want to look away. As I watched, a low, humming vibration filled the air. Not a mechanical hum, not like machinery or traffic, but something deeper. I could feel it more than hear it. My chest and hands tingled, and I had this sudden, strange awareness that I wasn't alone. Not in the human sense, but as if the shape was aware of me. My skin prickled. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake the feeling. The shape slowed and hovered just for a moment, then turned in a way that seemed deliberate, as though scanning the warehouse or the lot. I swear for a second I could sense it looking at me, though I couldn't tell from what exactly. I swallowed hard, stepping back, trying to stay calm. My mind was racing through all the possible explanations. Military exercise? Helicopter? Weather balloon? None of it fit. Then the lights came back on, one by one, flickering for a second before steadying, and the shape was gone. Just gone. No trace, no streak, nothing in the sky. I rubbed my eyes and looked around the lot. Empty. The dumpsters sat where they'd always been, the trucks still lined along the loading bays. I felt absurdly exposed, standing there alone, my phone still dead in my pocket. I didn't mention it to anyone that night. I wasn't sure I could explain it, and even now, thinking back, I'm not sure I want to. There were other odd things over the next few weeks. Lights flickering in that same pattern when no one was around. Security cameras going offline for a few seconds at a time. A humming I could catch sometimes if the wind was just right. Each time it was subtle, just enough to make me pause, glance up at the sky, and feel that same prickling awareness. One night, a coworker caught me staring at the lot during a break. "You seeing things again?" he said, half joking. I shrugged. How could I explain that whatever it was, whatever I saw, didn't feel malicious, just aware? Like it was observing, moving through its own rhythm, separate from anything I could touch or track. I started timing my breaks differently, trying to avoid the moments I'd seen it. But sometimes, the pull of that empty lot under the lights drew me out anyway. And sometimes, the hum would come first, low, almost welcoming, and I'd know it was near before I saw it. Not every night, but often enough that I couldn't ignore it. I thought about calling someone, the authorities, reporting it. But what would I say? White shape glides silently above my warehouse at night, then vanishes. No one would believe me, and the last thing I wanted was to see it react to attention. I started carrying my flashlight every night now, and I trained it upward whenever the hum comes first. Sometimes it feels closer, like it wants to be noticed. Other nights, I catch nothing and feel relief wash over me. But I never see it again in the same way. Always just that faint presence, teasing the edges of my vision, reminding me that something I can't name is moving around out there. I live alone now, partly because it's easier to control the environment, partly because I like the solitude when it's quiet. I check the lot from my window sometimes, watching the security lights. Every so often, one flickers just slightly like a heartbeat. And when it does, I feel the hair on my arms lift, the same low hum filling my chest, and I remember that night. That night when I stepped outside for a cigarette and the world went dark, and above me, silently, impossibly, something glided across the sky, aware, patient, and utterly indifferent to the human world beneath it. I was on the couch half watching some reruns with Jenna when the first flicker hit the TV. It wasn't the usual glitch you get when the cable box acts up. The picture stuttered once, like a shutter, then went back to normal. I was about to reach for the remote when the hum started outside, low, almost metallic, resonating through the house. Jenna paused mid-sip, eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" she said. I nodded, frowning. The hum wasn't constant. It pulsed in time with the flicker of the screen. Every few seconds, the power lines outside seemed to vibrate faintly, wires swaying in a rhythm that didn't match the wind. I got up and walked over to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The street was quiet. Not a single car, not a dog barking, nothing but the bare branches of the trees trembling in the cold night air. That's when I saw it, a glow hovering above the intersection a few houses down. Pale, almost bluish, soft enough that it didn't illuminate anything else. It didn't move like a drone or plane, it just hung there, shifting slightly as if suspended in invisible water. Jenna came up behind me, her hand on my shoulder. "What is that?" she whispered. I shrugged, not wanting to admit I had no idea. The glow lasted maybe 10 seconds, just long enough for me to see it clearly. Then it winked out, like someone had flipped a switch. The TV flickered again at the same time, almost synchronized with the hum of the wires. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was imagining things. Jenna didn't say anything, just stared at the empty street, her face pale in the flickering light of the living room. I opened the window slowly. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. I leaned out, trying to hear anything beyond the hum, footsteps, engines, voices. Nothing. Only the faint vibration from the power lines and the soft shiver of the wind through the branches. After a minute, the sound faded. The wires stopped humming, the street returned to normal, and the TV seemed fine again. I shut the window, keeping my hand on the frame longer than necessary. Maybe some transformer or something, I muttered. Jenna didn't look convinced, and honestly, neither was I. Later, we went outside, walking down the sidewalk toward the intersection. The glow hadn't left any marks on the pavement. No scorch, no residue, just ordinary asphalt wet from an earlier drizzle. I circled the block, peering into every yard, every driveway. Nothing. Not even streetlights seemed to flicker anymore. Everything was perfectly normal, except for the memory of the glow hanging there, perfectly still. I tried to sleep after that. Jenna eventually drifted off beside me, but I lay awake, listening to the quiet house, every creak and tick amplified. My mind kept replaying the sequence, the flicker, the hum, the glow. I thought maybe it was some sort of electrical interference, but I couldn't explain the timing. The lights and the wires didn't flicker randomly. They synced in a way that felt deliberate, coordinated. The next day, I checked the neighborhood online forums. No reports of power surges, no strange sightings. Even the local news had nothing. I called the utility company just to check if there had been issues on our line, but they said everything had been normal. No outages, no spikes, nothing. Jenna tried to brush it off. Probably just a weird trick of the lights, she said. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we saw was real, in some way that didn't make sense. A few nights later, I kept an eye on the intersection while walking the dog. I was expecting nothing, just a normal, quiet street. But once, when the streetlights swayed in the wind, I could have sworn the corner shimmered. I stopped mid-step, squinting. The glow didn't appear, but I felt a pressure, subtle, almost like standing under a heavy, unseen weight. Goosebumps ran down my arms, and I hurried home, telling myself it was imagination. Weeks passed. Life went back to normal, the house quiet again. The TV never flickered in that way. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the living room late at night, I notice the hum in the wires again. It's faint, almost comforting now, and just as easily ignored. And I catch myself glancing at the intersection, half expecting that pale, suspended light to appear, hovering there without moving, watching silently before it vanishes again. I never saw it with Jenna after that first night. She insists she's not worried about it, and I try to follow her lead. But when the wind picks up, when the power hums faintly, I can't help remembering how precise it all was. The flicker, the hum, the glow, and I wonder if it's just waiting for me to notice again. Even now, when I'm in that room, the memory of that light hovering over the street, suspended in the darkness, feels tangible. The wires still carry their low vibration sometimes, subtle enough to ignore, but loud enough to remind me. Whatever it was, it didn't hurt anyone, didn't move or make a sound beyond that quiet hum, but it made the night feel wrong, like a corner of reality had shifted just enough for me to see it. I haven't seen it since, haven't reported it, haven't told anyone beyond Jenna. But the streets feel different at night, quieter than they should be. The wires hum a little differently, and every so often, when the city sleeps and the TV flickers with static, I swear I feel the same weight in the air, hovering, waiting. I was walking home from my shift at the gas station, the kind of late night where the streetlights barely reach the edges of the sidewalk and the air hangs thick with the smell of damp asphalt. It had rained earlier, leaving puddles everywhere, and I kicked at a few absent-mindedly as I moved along. My headphones were in, music low, the usual soundtrack for a boring, quiet walk. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a car reflecting somewhere off the puddle ahead, but there was no sound, not even a distant engine. The reflection was almost too bright, too steady, glowing across the surface like someone had placed a lantern beneath the water. I stopped and crouched slightly, tilting my head to get a better look. I expected to see the street lamp overhead mirrored perfectly, but there was no street lamp above the puddle. The closest one was about 20 feet away, and even accounting for perspective, it didn't explain the glow. I took off my headphones and stood up straight, squinting at the reflection, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. I looked up. The street above me was empty. No cars, no lights, nothing moving except the leaves in the gutter stirred by a faint breeze. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the black, but not a single source of the bright light I had just seen. My stomach tightened. I shook my head, muttering to myself, and started walking again, faster this time. My feet splashed through the puddles, the sound loud in the silence. Every time I glanced at the next puddle, I felt that same odd hesitation. There wasn't a light in the water unless something up there was casting it, but I could see nothing. I reached the corner near the old apartment building where my friend Liam lived. There were more puddles there, bigger, deeper. One of them caught my attention and I stopped mid-step. The light was back, bright again, this time almost blinding, hovering just above the water. It wasn't moving like a reflection of anything overhead. It shifted slightly, as if it had a weight of its own, bending with some unseen current. I crouched again, heart thumping, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I even muttered out loud, "Okay, it's just some street lamp glare, just some lamp." But it didn't make sense. The nearest street lamp was across the street, casting long shadows the wrong way. The puddle was glowing from a source that wasn't there. Then I noticed the temperature had changed. Not drastically, but the air felt heavier, denser. The hairs on my arms stood up. I glanced around. Empty street. The apartment windows dark. Even the faint hum of the city in the distance seemed muted. My pulse was loud in my ears, louder than the faint dripping from gutters. I stood up slowly, glancing down at the puddle one last time. The light was there, hovering near the surface, like it had paused just for me to notice. And then, as if I had blinked, it was gone. The puddle reflected nothing now, just the dull gray of the street. I looked up instinctively, thinking maybe I had missed something moving overhead, some drone, some light on a distant building. But there was nothing, only stars, scattered across the sky, quiet, indifferent. I kept walking, faster now, feeling a tight knot of unease in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A car, a reflection, someone shining a flashlight, but nothing added up. The street was empty, silent. I glanced at every puddle I passed. Nothing. Just ordinary water reflecting ordinary night. I tried calling Liam when I reached the corner near his building, but my phone was dead. I had charged it before my shift, hadn't even used it all evening. Static. I frowned. Checked the battery indicator. Still full. That made me pause, that quiet impossibility, before I shoved the phone back in my pocket and started walking again, toward my block. The closer I got to home, the more I noticed it. The streetlights flickered once as I passed, the way they do when a transformer hums or the wires are old, but it was synchronized, almost deliberate. One blink at each pole, like something was moving along the street ahead of me. I glanced up at the sky, half expecting to catch the light I had seen earlier drifting among the stars. Nothing. Only the quiet, cold sky stretching endless above the rooftops. I finally reached my block. My house was dark, all windows unlit. Mom had gone to bed already. I unlocked the door, my hands trembling slightly from the cold and whatever else was building in me. Inside, I paused, listening to the familiar creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the fridge. Normal, safe, but I couldn't shake the memory of the puddle, the impossible light hovering just above the water, the way the street seemed altered after it disappeared. I kept checking the window that faced the street for the next half hour, even though I knew I would see nothing. The snow from earlier had mostly melted in the gutters, the puddles gone, streetlights steady now. I even stepped outside again, flashlight in hand, checking the corners, the shadows, the asphalt. Nothing moved. Nothing glowed, only the ordinary night, quiet, with stars scattered overhead. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying it. The way the light hung over the puddle, the way it had vanished when I looked up, the emptiness that followed. The streets, the stars, normal, untouched, but somehow not quite the same. In the days after, I told a few friends. They laughed it off. Reflection, one said. Car headlights, said another. But I knew what I had seen. Not a reflection, not a car. Too bright, too steady, and the way it moved against the water, like it had a mind of its own. I walked that same route a few times after, late at night, hoping to see it again. But the streets stayed empty. Puddles reflecting only street lamps and the sky. Sometimes when it's raining and the streets are quiet, I think about that night. I think about the puddle and the impossible light that lingered there, hovering and waiting. And I wonder how something so small, so fleeting, could make the world feel so different, like it left a space behind it that wasn't there before, a pocket of impossibility that I could see but couldn't touch. I got home safely that night, no harm done, no one following, no sudden disappearance beyond what I could already see. And yet, I keep walking home that way sometimes, eyes scanning puddles, wondering if it will happen again. If I'll see that impossible light reflected one more time before vanishing into nothing, leaving only the stars. We'd been driving up the winding road to our rental cabin in the Cascades for hours. The sun already dipping behind the peaks, painting the mountains in bruised purples and oranges. My wife, Lisa, and our 2 kids were bickering in the back seat over who got the last granola bar. I remember thinking how quiet it was once we finally turned off the main highway and onto the narrow, twisting road that led to the cabin. Trees pressed in on both sides, and the shadows were long and sharp, even as daylight lingered. When we pulled up to the cabin, the parking area was just a small clearing, gravel dust rising under the tires. I killed the engine and got out first, stretching, feeling the cool mountain air seep into my jacket. The kids scampered toward the porch while Lisa unloaded the cooler. The view from the cabin was what we'd come for. The valley below, thick with forest, fading into the evening mist while peaks curling like fingers into the clouds. We were unpacking when I first noticed it, this pale bluish glow over the valley. At first, I thought it was the fading sunlight, weirdly reflecting off the mist, but the angle was wrong. The sun had dipped behind the ridge on our side. There was no way light could have bounced like that. The glow was soft, diffused, like someone had taken a flashlight and smeared it across the fog, only it covered a much larger area than a handheld beam could. "Do you see that?" I asked Lisa, pointing toward the valley. She looked up from juggling coolers and grocery bags, frowning. "See what?" "The light, down there, over the valley." She turned, squinting, and her mouth went slightly slack. "Oh, wow, that's weird." The kids had now joined us, hopping around the porch railing, asking questions I couldn't answer. The glow was still there, pulsing subtly, like a heartbeat under the mist. I grabbed my camera from the bag, hoping to catch it, thinking a photo would make sense of it. But by the time I wrestled the lens out and turned it on, it had shifted. The edges were soft, blurred against the clouds rising from the valley floor, and then, in less than 30 seconds, it was gone. Just gone. I lowered the camera and rubbed my eyes, blinking rapidly, thinking maybe it had been an odd reflection, something with the mist catching the last light. Lisa shook her head, unsettled. It was too big, too bright, and there was nothing else. No fires, no trucks, nothing. We spent the next few minutes just staring down at the valley. The clouds hung low now, dull gray, normal, ordinary. The air smelled damp, earthy, and untouched, like it always did in these mountains. But the feeling lingered, an odd tension, like the valley had been holding something back. Later that evening, after we'd settled inside and the kids were asleep, I stepped out onto the porch again. Moonlight was weak, filtered through a thin layer of clouds. I half expected to see the glow return, maybe in the same place, maybe somewhere else. Nothing. The valley looked normal, the trees motionless. A deer trampled through the undergrowth, startled, but it was the only movement. I stood there for a long time, cigarette in hand, listening to the wind in the trees, wondering if I'd imagined it. The next morning I went down the trail behind the cabin, trying to get a better look at the valley. Everything was quiet, no signs of lights, fires, or any disturbance. I even checked the news, local reports, thinking maybe someone had seen something. Planes, helicopters, or anything. Nothing. Over the next few days, small things started to feel off. The fog rolled in thicker than normal, sticking to the cabin and trees, muffling sounds. At night, the wind sometimes carried a low hum, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me pause on the porch. The kids never noticed. The hum was too quiet, too odd to register as anything natural. And sometimes when I glanced down the valley, the clouds seemed wrong, like they were shifting in ways that didn't match the wind, curling against gravity just a little too perfectly. On our last night there, Lisa and I were sitting on the porch, cups of coffee cooling in our hands. The valley was hidden behind clouds, shadows pooling between peaks. I told her about the feeling I'd had the night before, the hum, the shapes in the mist, the way the trees sometimes seemed to tense. She nodded, not saying much, just letting the wind blow through her hair. I thought about the glow a lot on the drive home. I tried to reason it. Sunlight scattering weirdly, fog refracting the cabin's porch light, some distant campfire. But nothing fit. I've been back to that area in daylight since, trails mapped, peaks counted, valleys measured, and everything is as it should be. Completely ordinary. Yet sometimes late at night, I think about that glow, how it pulsed, how it seemed to linger just above the valley floor, quiet, patient, then dissolving into the clouds. And I wonder if it's still there, waiting, shifting with the fog, moving when I'm not looking, a presence too subtle to name, but real enough to make a man question the world he thought he knew. Even now, when I see mist rolling through a forest or fog settling over a valley, I check the edges of the clouds, half expecting that pale bluish light to reappear, slow and deliberate, hovering where it doesn't belong. And each time I realize I'll never quite know if I saw something extraordinary, or if my mind simply played a trick that felt far too vivid to ignore. The memory of that night lingers more vividly than the vacation itself, a quiet, haunting reminder that even in the most familiar landscapes, something can exist beyond explanation, waiting in the fog. I was sitting on the small deck outside my cabin, a thermos of coffee in hand and my old binoculars resting against my knees. The night was clear, the kind where the stars feel like they've fallen closer to Earth, scattered across the sky in a bright, endless dome. The mountain air was cold, carrying the faint scent of pine and the damp earth that still clung to the forest floor after an afternoon drizzle. I'd come up for the weekend just to get away from everything. Emails, work calls, the noise of the city. Stargazing was supposed to be simple, calming, a way to reset. I had my map of constellations spread out on the picnic table, and I was tracking a few familiar clusters while sipping coffee, trying to pick out things I didn't usually notice. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a plane or maybe a satellite, just moving a bit differently from the others. It was in the northwestern sky, somewhere near Cassiopeia. But the more I watched, the more wrong it seemed. The star pulsed, not like a twinkle caused by the atmosphere, not like a regular flicker. It was deliberate, almost rhythmic, like it was breathing in faint light. I brought my binoculars up slowly, trying not to shake my hands too much. When I focused on it, the pulsing became clearer, and it wasn't stationary. It moved subtly at first, just a little to the left, then back, then up a tiny fraction. Nothing like a comet or satellite I've ever seen. It didn't move across the sky like a plane or streak like a meteor. It was deliberate, controlled, and quiet. I leaned back for a moment, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The night can play tricks on your eyes, I thought. I'd spent hours alone on the mountain before without anything happening, but I kept looking and the movement was there. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars, zooming in, trying to get a better view, and then it shifted. Not just a little nudge this time. When I looked again, the star, or whatever it was, wasn't in the same place. My heart jumped a little. I didn't hear anything, of course. There was no noise except for the occasional rustle of a branch in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl. But the object had moved against the backdrop of fixed stars, and when it did, the pulsing light dimmed, slowly fading until it was gone entirely, leaving nothing but black space and the faint shimmer of real stars behind it. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes, feeling an odd mix of confusion and that nervous thrill you get when something inexplicable happens. I stepped back from the railing and looked around. The forest below was dark, shadowed in patches where the trees blocked the moonlight. Nothing moved, no light, no sound beyond what was normal for a mountain night. I half expected it to reappear, but the sky was just sky again. I poured myself another cup of coffee, sitting down and trying to make sense of it. I kept glancing back at the area where it had been, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the atmosphere, a reflection, a misjudgment of perspective. But I knew what I'd seen. The star hadn't just twinkled, it pulsed and moved. I had binoculars, I had a clear line of sight. There was no reason for me to mistake it. I considered reaching for my phone to try to take a picture, but I hesitated. Zooming in with my binoculars had already felt like straining at the wrong end of a telescope. Too focused, too close, and the night's depth seemed to flatten in a way that made me uneasy. I didn't want to break that fragile reality with the harsh light of a camera flash or the digital screen. Still, I watched for a while, scanning the area carefully. Nothing. Not a flicker. Not a trace. Just the stars, each distant and silent in its proper place. I felt an odd sense of distance, like the mountain and the sky themselves had shifted somehow. My cabin seemed smaller, the deck felt narrower, as if the world had compressed for a moment around that pulsing light. Later, I sat inside, the coffee long gone cold, and tried to tell myself the usual explanations. Could be a satellite, maybe a plane with a weird light configuration, some optical illusion from the moist air after the rain. But nothing fit. Satellites move in straight, predictable lines, not subtle pulses that vanish. Planes make noise and their lights are steady. Optical illusions don't make something vanish into nothing, perfectly aligned with the stars without a trace. I tried telling myself I'd just misjudged the movement, but the pulse, that was unmistakable. It had a rhythm that felt alive, deliberate, almost attentive. And the way it shifted before fading, that wasn't something a random flicker does. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the light sliding through the sky, pulsing slowly. I kept picturing the stars in that cluster, trying to see if it had been there again, somewhere out of sight, just waiting. The next morning, I hiked a little closer to the ridge above the cabin, scanning the horizon where I thought I'd seen it. There was nothing, just the trees and the distant mountains rolling into the next valley. I checked the sky for anything out of place, and of course, there wasn't a hint of movement. Birds flew lazily between the pines, the wind whispered through the trees, normal morning sounds. I went about my day, but I kept catching myself glancing at the sky, my mind returning to that pulsing light. I wondered if anyone else had seen it, if maybe it had been something mundane I'd never recognize. But the idea didn't satisfy me. It had been too precise, too strange, too deliberate. Over the next few days, I returned to the deck at night, binoculars in hand, scanning the same patch of sky. The stars were all where they should be. The cluster near Cassiopeia was normal, stable, nothing out of place. I even brought a small telescope I keep in the cabin, setting it up to track that sector. Nothing. Not a flicker, not a pulse, nothing moving against the star field. I keep thinking about it, though. The memory of that light is stubborn. The way it pulsed, the rhythm of it, the way it shifted against the stars, deliberate and calm. The forest and the mountains looked ordinary when I returned, but for a moment, the sky had been someone else's or something else's. I don't know what it was, and I don't know if I'll ever see it again. But every clear night, I still go out on the deck, thermos in hand, binoculars ready, just in case it returns. And every night I hope and I wait, scanning that same quiet patch of stars for a movement that might not happen. I was making my usual rounds on Glenhaven Drive that Tuesday night, the street mostly empty and quiet, the kind of suburban stretch that feels like it belongs in a daytime postcard, but at night it's just dark and still. I'd finished most of my route, the evening chill settling in as the streetlights flickered weakly above. My van's headlights caught the rows of neatly trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes, and I was thinking about grabbing a coffee at the gas station before heading back to the depot. Then, I saw it. I slowed the van to a crawl, squinting through the windshield, trying to figure out what made me pause. All the mailboxes along the north side of the street were glowing, not like a streetlight hitting them at a weird angle, not reflective from car lights. They had a pale, almost bluish-white glow, like a thin layer of fog settled on them and lit from within. The glow was uniform, smooth, no flicker, no warmth. It just was. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the streetlights were playing tricks or there was some reflective tape I hadn't noticed. But no, the glow seemed to hover above the boxes, slightly lifting them from their posts, or at least giving the illusion of it. I cut the engine and stepped out, the asphalt cold under my boots and the usual night sounds, a distant dog barking, wind rustling leaves, suddenly felt muted. The glow seemed to absorb sound in some way, or maybe it just made me hyper-aware of the absence of it. I walked closer, keeping my flashlight in my hand, but turned off. I didn't want to disrupt whatever this was. The glow didn't flicker or move toward me. It just stayed above the mailboxes, steady and silent. I could see the numbers on the boxes clearly, but the light didn't come from them. It seemed to float just a few inches above. I half expected it to reveal something hidden, a reflection of someone standing there. But there was nothing. Just the light and the boxes. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" And the sound of my own voice seemed too loud in the street. The normal suburban smells were gone, replaced by something faint and metallic. Or maybe it was just the cold air catching on my nose in a way that felt off. I crouched slightly to get a better look at the nearest box. The glow didn't respond, didn't flicker, didn't blink. It just existed. And then I noticed something else. Shadows. Not mine, exactly, but the way the light interacted with the grass. It cast shadows that didn't make sense, bending across the ground in soft angles, as if the source was real but physically impossible. I shook my head and stepped back, telling myself I was tired, that it had been a long day, that I'd been walking the route since 4 a.m. and my brain was fried. I tried to call my dispatcher to see if maybe a neighbor was testing some weird lighting setup, but the phone wouldn't work. Signal was fine elsewhere, just on this block, nothing. I pocketed it, feeling a weird pressure in my chest. Not panic, exactly, but a tightening like I was staring too long at something my brain wasn't meant to process. Then I looked up, and the glow was gone. Just gone. No fading, no flare, nothing. The mailboxes were there, unlit, ordinary, mundane. The street was normal. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting their tired yellow light on the asphalt. A car passed 2 blocks away, headlights swinging across the scene, and for a second I thought maybe I had hallucinated it. But my knees were still shaking, my stomach tight. I could feel the chill through my jacket, sharper now, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something unsettled. I got back in the van, started the engine, and drove slowly down the street, scanning every box. Nothing. Nothing. Not a hint. Not even a reflection from a nearby window. It was like it had never been there, except I knew it had. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I kept telling myself it was probably some trick of the light, some chemical residue on the boxes from the rain maybe, some reflection I hadn't noticed before. But that didn't explain the shadows, or the sense that the world had gone quiet for a moment while it was there. I finished the route slowly, trying not to look back, my eyes flicking to the side mirrors and the empty road behind me. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I felt like I might see it again, hovering just beyond the van's lights, glowing and impossible, but nothing appeared. The rest of the neighborhood was quiet, normal. My stomach was in knots the whole way back to the depot, the familiar smells of asphalt and exhaust failing to calm me. The next day, I drove the route again in daylight, walking past the same mailboxes, touching the metal, inspecting for any residue, anything unusual. Nothing. Everything was ordinary. Painted metal, screws holding numbers, no residue, no strange reflections. A neighbor waved as I passed, asking about deliveries, and I forced a laugh. "Everything normal today," I said. She nodded, friendly and mundane, and I kept moving, but I kept looking at the sky, at the tops of trees, half expecting to see a pulse of light trailing through the branches. For weeks after, I kept imagining the glow, the way it seemed to hang in the air. The sensation of quiet that wasn't just absence of sound, but an almost physical presence of something else. I couldn't explain why, but whenever I drove past that street at night, even months later, I felt a strange hesitation. My eyes flicking to the mailboxes, my heart picking up for a second, half expecting that impossible light to return. I never saw it again. Not anywhere else, not at any other route, not in any other neighborhood. And I can't explain it. My coworkers laughed when I mentioned it in passing, assuming it was exhaustion or some reflection. Maybe it was. But I know what I saw. I know the way the world went quiet for a moment, how the shadows bent unnaturally, how the glow just vanished as if it had never been. I still deliver to Glenhaven Drive, though I try to do it quickly. Headlights scanning the houses, mind half on the mail, half on the memory of that street under that unearthly glow. I've been careful not to talk about it much, because people think you're joking, or that you're imagining things, and I suppose maybe I could be, but I can't shake that memory. The sense that for a few minutes something else was there, just above the mailboxes, watching, waiting, or maybe just existing in a way the rest of us can't see. Even now, I glance at my watch, thinking of the time it happened, the cold air pressing on my face, the street lit in that impossible light. I don't know if I'll ever know what it was, and part of me hopes I don't. Because some things, once you've seen them, change how you look at the ordinary, and you never quite feel like the world is entirely your own again. The night had been quiet up until the sound hit me. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, the kind that's more habit than taste, listening to the occasional car passing down Elmwood Lane. It was early July, warm enough that the air had that sticky summer feel and the sky was clear, the stars spilling like spilled sugar. That's when the wind chimes started clanging. Not softly, not once or twice, but full on, the metal rods striking each other in a rhythm that didn't make sense. There was no wind. The trees weren't moving. I even glanced up and watched the leaves, thinking maybe a gust had picked up, but everything hung perfectly still. My daughter Ellie came running out barefoot, blinking against the porch light. "Mom, Dad, the chimes," she said, pointing toward the yard. My wife Rachel followed, wrapping a towel around herself as if the sound had somehow chilled her. "I don't know," I admitted, standing, coffee forgotten on the railing. I thought maybe it was a branch, or... I stopped because even as I spoke, the clanging grew louder, faster. It wasn't a gust of wind. It didn't sound random. It sounded like something was deliberately striking them, but slowly, methodically, without anyone there. We all froze, listening, trying to locate the source. The sound faded as quickly as it started, leaving the quiet of our backyard intact. I leaned on the railing, rubbing my forehead. "Okay, that's weird. Very weird," I said. Rachel gave me that look that says she thinks I'm underestimating how odd this is. Ellie was gripping my arm, eyes wide, waiting for me to explain. I didn't have one. Then I saw it. It was pale, almost like a fogged-out moon hovering just above our yard, just past the lilac bush we'd planted last spring. The glow wasn't harsh, not like a flashlight or a porch light. It was soft, diffuse, bluish-white, and it hovered, completely motionless, maybe a foot or two above the grass. My first thought was reflection, or maybe a car parked somewhere throwing headlights our way, but there was nothing. No road, no cars, just our yard and the faint glow. I stepped forward slowly, instinct telling me to stay calm, my kids behind me. The light didn't react. It just hung there, pulsing ever so slightly, like it was breathing or alive in some way I couldn't grasp. I couldn't hear anything from it. No hum, no vibration, just that faint light that seemed to push the dark away from the yard. "Dad," Ellie whispered. It's pretty." I swallowed hard. Pretty wasn't the word I'd use. Unsettling, maybe, intriguing. I squinted, trying to figure out its size, its shape. It was oval-ish, but nothing precise, edges hazy as if looking through steam or a lens smeared with oil. I tried calling Rachel's name, pointing toward it, but she seemed frozen, staring, unable to speak. I debated pulling out my phone, but I hesitated. Something about taking a picture felt intrusive, like I'd be breaking some rule I didn't understand. I watched it, trying to remember every detail. The clanging from the chimes echoed faintly in my ears, and for a moment I thought the glow might be the cause, some magnetic reaction I couldn't explain. Then the strangest thing happened. Time seemed to compress. One moment I was standing there, and the next, it was gone. No fading, no drift. The light just wasn't there anymore. Our yard looked completely normal. The grass still damp from the sprinklers we'd run that evening, the lilac bush unlit, ordinary. The air was still, the chimes silent. Ellie blinked and looked at me. "It went away?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding oddly small in the quiet. I glanced around the yard, half expecting to see some trace of it, some residual shimmer on the grass, but there was nothing. Everything looked untouched, undisturbed. Rachel finally spoke, voice tight. Did anyone else see that?" "Yes," I said, though my throat was dry. "All of us." We stayed on the porch for a while, eyes darting to the yard, ears straining for the wind chimes or any sign of it returning. Nothing happened. I eventually went inside, the house feeling smaller somehow, the familiar shadows in corners suddenly heavier, like the light had left a void. The next day, I checked the backyard thoroughly, looking for scorched grass, burned flowers, anything abnormal. Nothing. The chimes were hung in their usual spot, the rods aligned and motionless, the yard ordinary. I even tested the wind, hoping for a gust to repeat what happened, but it never did. I thought about telling my friends, but I knew they'd dismiss it. I kept it mostly to myself, though sometimes I bring it up casually, testing reactions. Most people laugh, some shrug it off, a few get that look that says they want to believe but don't. I can't explain it either. No sound, no wind, nothing left behind. Just that light hovering, and the moment it vanished, the yard returned to normal. Weeks passed, and life went on. I drove to work, paid bills, mowed the lawn, and occasionally, when I passed the backyard in the evening, I half expect the glow to return, half expects the chimes to start clanging again on their own. But it hasn't. Sometimes at night, when I'm up late, I hear the faintest echo of metal striking metal in my memory, and I feel that same prickling unease across my skin, like a warning or a reminder. I know it wasn't a reflection, I know it wasn't a trick of the light, and I know we weren't imagining it. Something was there, hovering, silent, watching, or maybe just existing. I can't explain it, and part of me doesn't want to, because whatever it was, it didn't harm us. It just showed up, made the world feel smaller for a moment, and left, leaving us alone with the question of what else might be out there, hovering quietly beyond understanding. I haven't seen it again, and I don't think I ever will. But every time I hear the wind chimes at night, even when the air is still, I stop and listen. And I swear, for a brief second, I can almost feel that pale light hovering just beyond the yard, watching, waiting, silent. I'd been walking the North Creek Trail since just before sunrise, the kind of morning where the fog still clings to the pines and the ground is slick with overnight dew. I like these early shifts as a park ranger. The forest feels different before the day officially starts. Quiet, alive in a way most people don't notice, the way the air smells damp and cold, and even the birds seem like they're holding their breath. That morning, something felt off right away. Usually, even this early, you hear a few birds waking up, the occasional jay squawking or a chickadee flitting through the branches, but there was nothing. Dead silence. I stopped at the first clearing, letting my boots sink slightly into the soft mud, and looked around. The fog was low, thin enough to see a few dozen yards, and still no movement, no sound. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just too early, I thought. But as I moved deeper into the trail, the silence didn't break. I passed the bend near the old ranger cabin, the place where we sometimes see deer before dawn. No deer, no squirrels scurrying, just quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant, the way it brushed through the needles with barely a sound. I took my usual route toward the small overlook where the trail opens up above the creek. That's when I noticed the first weird thing that I couldn't just write off. A faint, pale light floated over the treetops. At first, I thought maybe it was the sun catching a low mist, but it wasn't warm or golden. It was almost white, washed out, the kind of pale that doesn't seem natural. I froze. My ranger instincts kicked in. Normally, I'd scan for hikers or flashlights from another trail, maybe a drone, but the trail had been empty all morning. The light drifted slowly, almost lazily over the treetops, and I couldn't hear a thing. Not the usual birds, not the wind, not a plane or a car from the road half a mile away. I lifted my binoculars from my pack and zoomed in. The light didn't have shape like a bird or an aircraft. It was like a softly glowing disc, smooth and steady, just floating a few feet above the tree line. I blinked and looked again. My fingers felt tense on the straps of the binoculars. It stayed in place, moving maybe a little to the left, then paused. I could almost convince myself it was a trick of the fog, but something about it was deliberate. Then, just as quickly as I noticed it, the birds started again. 1 second, the forest was frozen. The next, a wave of sound broke over me. Jays, robins, and sparrows all at once, calling, flitting, settling into the branches. The light was gone. No trace, no reflection, no flicker in the mist. Just nothing, and the forest acting as if nothing unusual had happened. I lowered the binoculars, trying to make sense of it. My boots squelched in the mud as I walked the trail a little further, glancing up constantly. Nothing. The fog began to lift slowly, revealing the familiar shapes of the pines, the distant creek glinting in the first rays of sunlight. I passed a small copse of maples where I usually see the morning flock of robins, but this time They were normal, moving naturally, as if whatever had silenced them earlier hadn't existed. By the time I reached the overlook, I felt tense, my mind racing. It was like the forest had held its breath, and I had walked into a pause between moments. I leaned on the railing, staring down at the creek, trying to track any movement in the fog below. Nothing unusual. No lights, no shapes, just the creek glimmering silver and gold in the rising sun. I kept my phone out, thinking maybe I could catch something if it appeared again, but it stayed silent. No camera or flashlight could explain what I'd seen. The light had been too steady, too distinct, and it had vanished completely when the forest awoke. I even tried replaying the moment in my mind, remembering how the light seemed almost liquid, floating with a calmness that didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen in the forest. I walked back toward the ranger cabin, still alert, scanning every branch and fog-shrouded corner. The forest felt normal again, yet the memory of that light lingered. I passed the spots where I usually see deer and squirrels, noticing the way the morning mist made everything look sharper, brighter, but it didn't hide anything unusual. Nothing was following me, nothing trailing behind me. The forest was calm, as if nothing had happened, except I knew it had. Back at the cabin, I sat at the table, mug of coffee steaming in front of me, and tried to talk myself down. Could it have been a reflection? A prank? My mind playing tricks on early morning fatigue? None of it fit. The precise silence before, the way the light hovered and then disappeared exactly when the forest seemed to wake, the certainty that I had seen something real. Over the next few days, I patrolled the same trail, same early hour, same foggy mornings, and I didn't see anything like it again. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, deer grazed. The forest returned to itself, and I kept thinking maybe I had imagined it all, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Intentionally, quietly observing, and then gone. I haven't talked about it much, only to a coworker who didn't press, just nodded. I ride the trails in the early mornings still, keeping my eyes on the treetops, sometimes catching the pale wash of fog in the sun and wondering. The forest feels the same, but I know it isn't quite the same as it was that morning. Something passed through or hovered above and left only the memory of silence and light. Even now, weeks later, when I walk the trail and the fog sits low, I can feel that pause in the air. The birds seem louder sometimes, the forest sharper. I keep expecting, or maybe hoping, to see that light again, but I haven't. And maybe that's part of it. Knowing it was real, knowing it left no trace, and realizing that some things can exist right in front of you and vanish before you understand them. I was riding my bike down County Road 14 just after midnight. The kind of night where everything feels muted, except for the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional hoot of an owl. It had rained earlier, so the road was slick, and the air smelled faintly of wet pine and earth. I like these late-night rides. It's the only time I feel like the world slows down enough to think. I'd passed the old Miller farm about 20 minutes ago, the place that's been abandoned for years. The barn's roof sagged in the middle, and weeds had swallowed the driveway. I remember noticing how quiet it was, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, and I slowed down, just letting the bike coast. Then I saw them. At first, I thought it might be fireflies. Something about the way the light moved along the tree line on the left side of the road. A faint string of white lights, maybe 10 or 12, hopping along the edge of the pines. But the movement was too steady. It wasn't random or jittery like insects. They moved in a straight, precise line, almost like someone had drawn it with a slow hand. I stopped pedaling, putting my feet down in the wet grass at the side of the road, trying to get a better look. My heart rate picked up, not in a panic, more in that alert way where you know something doesn't fit the rules you understand. The lights kept moving, maintaining the exact same pace, like a procession. No noise, not even a faint buzz or hum, just lights gliding. I glanced at the road behind me, half expecting a car or a truck to emerge, but it was empty. No headlights, no sound, just me and this line of faint lights moving along the tree line. I wanted to call someone, but my phone was in my backpack under my jacket. Even thinking about reaching for it felt wrong, like it would somehow ruin the rhythm of whatever I was seeing. As I watched, the lights reached the point where the trees thinned and the road curved slightly. I squinted, trying to see if they would follow the curve, slow down, disappear into the darkness, but then they did something I didn't expect. They didn't drift into the shadows. They vanished. Just like that, 1 second they were there, tracing the edge of the trees, and the next, there was nothing. No flicker, no dimming, no trail left behind. The night was the same dark green-black it had been before. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, feeling stupid. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the wet air, the reflection off the wet road, the street light way up the road throwing its yellow cone over the treetops. Maybe it had played tricks on me. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't hallucinating. Not in the way that made you doubt reality entirely, at least. It was the certainty of it. Lights, moving deliberately, vanishing instantly. I got back on my bike, heart still pounding, and rode slowly, glancing at the edge of the trees every few seconds. Nothing. Just the normal swaying of branches and the faint glint of water on leaves. When I passed the spot where I'd stopped, I slowed again. Maybe I had missed something. But the ground was empty, the trees normal, no flicker in the darkness. The next mile or so felt longer than it should have. Every shadow seemed heavier. Every gust of wind rustling the pines felt like it was a reminder that I hadn't really left. I kept expecting a sound, a light, anything to reassure me that whatever it was had gone, but nothing came. About 2 miles down the road, I finally felt safe enough to increase speed. I passed the little bridge over the creek where the water shimmered faintly under the moon, and I realized my phone was still in my bag, buzzing. I dug it out, checking messages, emails, something, anything to bring me back to normal. At home, I locked the garage behind the bike and leaned it against the wall, still trying to process it. Rachel was asleep, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I poured a glass of water and went to the window that faced the backyard. Nothing. Just the backyard, the fence, the trees swaying gently. I felt like I should see the lights again, as if keeping watch would make sense of it. But there was nothing. I've been back on that road since, during the day and at night, riding past the Miller farm and the tree line where it happened. Nothing. No lights, no movement, just empty trees and shadows. Sometimes I wonder if it had been a drone, some kind of testing from a neighbor, but the way the lights moved didn't match anything I've ever seen. No cameras, no blinking red markers, no sound. It felt intentional, like the lights knew I was watching. And the moment I gave my full attention, they disappeared. I haven't told many people about it. Friends would either laugh or chalk it up to imagination. But I keep replaying it in my head, trying to remember every detail. The exact path along the trees, the rhythm of the lights, how they didn't change pace, how they disappeared in one instant. I ride that road sometimes, late at night, hoping to see them again. I haven't. But there are moments when the wind moves just right through the pines, or when the road glistens with leftover rain, that I swear I catch a faint glow in my peripheral vision. And every time I stop, heart quickening, and I wait, remembering the certainty that something had been moving just along the edge of those trees, just beyond understanding, silent, deliberate, and gone. I still don't know what it was. And maybe that's the part that's hardest, knowing something unusual happened, knowing it was real, and yet having no explanation, no trace, nothing concrete to hold on to. Just a memory of lights moving through the dark and the quiet knowledge that the world is stranger than I'd ever thought. The fog was thick that morning, crawling over the harbor like it was trying to smother everything. I'd gotten there around 4 a.m. earlier than usual, but something about the way the tide looked in the half-light made me grab my gear and head down to the docks. My old aluminum skiff was already tied to the pier, bobbing gently against the posts. Everything smelled like salt and wet wood, the kind of damp that sticks to your jacket and gloves. I set out into the quiet water, paddling slowly so I didn't disturb anything. The harbor was empty except for a few moored boats, their outlines swallowed by the fog. Normally by this time, gulls were already circling, squawking over whatever scraps had washed in overnight. Today, nothing. Complete silence except for the occasional drip of water off the hull. I was a little uneasy, but I pushed it aside. Some mornings are just quiet. I paddled out toward the deeper channel where the fish usually start moving, keeping my flashlight handy. It was one of those cheap handhelds with a dim beam, but enough to catch a bobber or a bit of reflection on the water. Then I saw it. A faint glow, just above the water, moving erratically. Not bouncing like a reflection, really, but it seemed to float, hopping slightly like it was rolling on an invisible wave. My first thought was a buoy light, but there was nothing there. No chain, no post, nothing that could explain it. I stopped paddling, letting the boat drift a little, and stared. The lights, there were 3 of them now, moved in a loose line, sliding over the surface. They didn't make any sound, didn't ripple the water. It was eerie. I raised my flashlight, pointing it toward the lights, hoping maybe someone else had put out lanterns or something along the channel. The lights disappeared. Just like that. Not fading, not sinking, nothing. 1 second they were there, and the next the water was smooth again, glassy, fog swallowing everything. I blinked and swung the flashlight side to side. The harbor looked normal, but the fog made it hard to tell. No movement. No sign that anything had even been there. I tried to convince myself it was the reflection of a dock light somewhere, some optical quirk. But I knew the harbor well. There were no lights on that part of the channel, not that early. My chest tightened. I paddled slowly forward, ears straining for any sound. The fog muffled everything, and the usual creaks of the wooden pier were absent. Even the gulls hadn't shown. A few minutes later, I saw it again. A single point of pale light low over the water, bouncing gently, almost like it was trying to follow me. I froze. My hands clenched the paddle, and I forced myself to take a breath. I didn't move the boat. The light shifted slightly, almost lazily, not aggressive. Not fast, just there. I raised the flashlight again, hand shaking slightly. The light vanished instantly, the water returning to its normal dark reflection of the fog. I could see the faint ripples from my paddling, the mist hanging over the harbor, everything normal, except I felt the kind of cold awareness you get when something isn't right, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stayed where I was, scanning. Nothing. The harbor was still. Even the boat seemed quieter, as if it didn't want to touch the water. I paddled closer to the pier, slowly keeping my eyes on the fog. There was a faint sense of movement out there. Subtle, maybe just shadows shifting, but I couldn't be sure. The fog played tricks. Once I reached the pier, I tied the skiff and climbed out, shivering even though I was wearing layers. I walked along the dock, flashlight cutting through the fog, looking for anything unusual. No footprints, no floating debris, nothing. Just wet wood and low mist. I leaned on the railing, staring out at the water, and that's when I noticed the harbor lights from the town across the bay. Usually they threw long reflections across the water, but now the reflections were broken, flickering strangely as if the fog itself was bending the light. I felt a sudden unease, like I was being watched, though there was no one there. The gulls started up finally, a few lazy cries, wings brushing the water as they landed. The normal sounds returned gradually, but I kept my flashlight ready, scanning the foggy channel. The harbor looked calm, normal again, yet I couldn't shake the memory of those lights. I stayed a while longer, drifting in my skiff, but nothing reappeared. Not the bouncing lights, not the flickers. The fog began lifting slightly as the sun started to edge over the horizon. I paddled back to shore slowly, keeping my eyes on the water, half expecting the lights to show again. They didn't. The harbor looked ordinary, almost mundane, but something had been out there, moving over the water, unseen and silent. When I got back to the dock, I sat on the edge, boots dangling over the water, and let myself breathe. I thought about calling someone, a friend who fishes in the harbor sometimes, but the rational part of me kept saying I'd imagine it. Fog plays tricks, the mind wakes too early. But I knew what I'd seen. The pattern, the movement, the way the lights vanished the instant I shone the flashlight. It wasn't ordinary. I packed up slowly, dragging my skiff back to its usual spot. The fog had mostly lifted, the harbor now bright with early morning sun. I kept looking back over the water as I loaded my gear, half expecting something to reappear. Nothing. Just the ordinary docks, moored boats, gulls diving for breakfast. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, scanning the harbor in the distance. Everything looked normal, mundane even, yet I could still picture those pale lights floating silently over the water, vanishing when I tried to find them. The memory pressed against the back of my mind like the weight of fog itself. Real, unexplained, and untraceable. By the time I reached my apartment, sunlight was breaking fully over the town, the harbor now bright and alive with morning activity. I made coffee, stared out the window at the bay, and tried to shake it off. But I haven't stopped thinking about it. Every foggy morning now, every early shift, I remember the silence, the floating lights, and the way the water seemed too still, too calm, as if something had passed over it and then left, leaving me the only witness. Even now, when the harbor fog rolls in again, I glance toward the channel, flashlight ready in hand out of habit, half hoping and half dreading. Nothing appears, but I know it was there, moving over the water, waiting, or maybe just passing, completely silent and completely gone before I could understand it. I was finishing my break behind the warehouse, the night shift dragging on longer than usual. It was late, around 2:30 a.m., and the whole industrial park felt empty, except for the hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional squeak of metal against metal. I liked the quiet sometimes. It gave me space to think without anyone bothering me. But that night, the silence felt heavy, almost too heavy. I'd gone outside to smoke, standing near the fence that separated our lot from the old storage yard next door. The lot was usually dead at this hour, except for the occasional raccoon or stray cat. I was leaning against the railing, puffing slowly, when something caught my eye. Shadows. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving the chain link fence, or maybe a pile of trash shifting. But the shadows didn't act right. They moved on their own, darting across the perimeter, bending around corners in ways that didn't match anything behind the fence. I froze, staring, trying to rationalize. Maybe a worker from the neighboring lot, I thought, but it was fenced off and padlocked. Nothing was supposed to be in there. The shadows paused when I took a step closer. My heart picked up, a low, tight thrum in my chest. The air felt thick, almost metallic. I squinted into the darkness, waiting for my eyes to adjust. That's when I saw it. A pale light, hovering just above the ground on the other side of the fence. It wasn't bright, just a soft, bluish-white glow, and it didn't flicker like a flashlight or a lamp. It moved, slowly, as if drifting with no sound at all. My first instinct was to step back, but curiosity pinned me in place. I raised my hand to block the cold wind, and the light shifted slightly, like it noticed me. I swallowed and whispered to myself, "What the hell?" The shadows that had been moving along the fence stopped completely. Everything froze, except that glow. I tried to focus, my eyes darting around for a shape, any sign of a person or an animal. Nothing. Just the light, smooth and quiet, suspended over the ground. I took a cautious step toward it, thinking maybe it was something reflective, a discarded piece of metal catching a distant light. But as I moved, the light responded. It lifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, and drifted sideways, vanishing behind the edge of a shipping container before I could get a proper look. I reached out instinctively as if I could grab it, and it was gone. The shadows along the fence were still, the lot silent again. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. "I must be seeing things," I muttered. I walked along the fence, trying to see where it had gone. Nothing, no light, no movement, just the faint hum of the refrigeration units. My phone was in my pocket, but I hesitated to pull it out. Cameras never do justice, and I didn't want the glow to vanish if it returned. I stayed near the fence a little longer, scanning the lot, my ears straining for anything out of place. That's when I noticed the shadows again, shifting, small flickers along the ground. I couldn't tell if it was from the light of a distant street lamp or something else. I stepped back, heart hammering, telling myself I was being paranoid. On the way back to the break area, the air felt wrong, like someone or something was watching from just out of sight. I kept my flashlight on, swinging it slowly, catching nothing but the usual clutter of crates and pallets. Yet, the feeling didn't go away. My skin prickled, and every instinct screamed at me not to linger. When my break ended, I went back inside, but the unease followed. I kept glancing at the windows facing the yard, half expecting to see that soft glow again. It didn't appear, though I thought I saw a flicker just beyond the fence once, too quick to be sure. The rest of my shift dragged, and I found myself telling anyone who'd listen that the yard looked weird tonight, that the shadows were off. Most shrugged it off. Night shift messes with your eyes, one of the maintenance guys said. Maybe. But I knew what I saw. Something was there, moving just out of reach, ignoring the rules of the place. Driving home, the streetlights felt dimmer than usual. My van's headlights illuminated the road, but the edges of the tree line seemed to shift unnaturally. I kept expecting to see the glow hovering behind a fence or tree, and every time I blinked, I'd catch a faint trace in the corner of my vision, gone when I looked directly. When I got home, I locked the doors and sat in the living room for a while, staring out at the street. Everything was quiet. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional dog barking, nothing like the yard behind the warehouse. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself the glow had been some trick of the fog and the shadows. But the memory was too vivid. The way it moved, the way the shadows froze when it appeared, the way the air itself seemed heavier. None of it fit anything I'd experienced before. Over the next few nights, I avoided the yard entirely. Every shift I glanced toward the fence, half expecting it to happen again. Sometimes the shadows seemed to twitch unnaturally, and I'd catch a flicker of light out of the corner of my eye. But it never repeated exactly. Even now, weeks later, I notice things. A glint on a chain-link fence, a shadow that doesn't behave right, a flicker of light in the mist outside my window. I can't explain it, and I don't try much anymore. I just remember the hum, the quiet that followed, and the glow that moved on its own, ignoring everything I know about the world. It's there in the memory and sometimes in the corner of my vision. Always just out of reach, never fully revealing itself. And I keep thinking, if it ever comes back, will I see more, or will it vanish before I can even notice it? I still do my job, make my deliveries, finish my shifts, but I walk a little faster past the lot now. And when I hear something that shouldn't be there, or see shadows behaving oddly, I stop, look, and remind myself that sometimes the world holds things that don't obey the rules we understand. And maybe, just maybe, that pale glow drifting behind a fence isn't finished showing me what it wants me to see. I was finishing my last delivery for the night, the kind where everything's quiet, except the hum of the van's engine and the faint buzz of neon signs in the distance. It was just past 11 p.m., and the streets of Cedar Ridge were empty, the kind of empty that makes you notice every little sound, a dog barking 3 blocks away, the scrape of a loose shutter in the wind. I'd done this route enough times that I knew every turn and shortcut without thinking. I pulled into the lot for the last house, an older duplex with peeling paint and a single dim porch light. The van's headlights washed over the driveway, and as I cut the engine, every other exterior light on the street, lamps on poles, security lights, a few from the houses themselves, flickered once in unison. Just a quick dip and back on. I blinked. I muttered something under my breath. Great, power surge or something. But as I stepped out, I noticed it, a soft hum in the air. Not mechanical, not from my van, nothing I could place. It wasn't loud, just low enough that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced up, thinking maybe one of the streetlights had been oscillating strangely, or some transformer down the block was acting up. That's when I saw it. A dim, oval-shaped glow hovered over the trees at the end of the street. Pale, bluish-white, just enough light to make it visible through the thin mist that had rolled in overnight. It moved slowly, almost lazily, in a way that made no sense. It wasn't following the road. It wasn't stationary. It just drifted above the tree line, calm, deliberate. I froze, my hands gripping the package I was supposed to deliver. The hum grew a fraction louder, almost imperceptibly, like the air itself had thickened around me. My brain tried to rationalize. A drone? But I hadn't seen anything like it. No blinking lights, no shape. It was a glow, smooth, uniform, not mechanical. I stepped back toward the van, heart racing, and the glow tilted slightly, moving along the street at a pace that felt off. I squinted, and it seemed to pause whenever I blinked or shifted my gaze. The hum never stopped. I reached for my phone to grab a picture, and the glow dimmed as if sensing the motion. It wasn't gone entirely, but it faded just enough that my camera couldn't pick it up properly. I lowered the phone and watched as it drifted toward the far edge of the trees and vanished completely. No fade into the sky, no movement behind the clouds, just gone. I stood there for a long moment, the hum gone, the lights normal, the street entirely silent again. My hands were trembling, and I realized I hadn't even breathed for a while. Shaking, I got back into the van. The engine started smoothly, no hiccups, no interference, nothing that suggested anything abnormal had occurred except for my own nerves. I drove slowly down the street, glancing up at the tree line again. Nothing. Every house was dark, every lamp steady. The neighborhood was ordinary again. On the way back to the depot, my mind replayed the event over and over. The synchronization of the lights, the hum, the slow drift of that glow, it all made sense in no logical way. I thought about stopping at a gas station to tell someone, anyone, but I realized there'd be no evidence. No trail, no video, no drone or drone pilot to question. Just me. I kept thinking I'd missed something. Maybe there was a plane behind the clouds? No, too slow, too deliberate. A weather balloon? Could be. Except of all the nights I've driven these streets, I'd never seen one behave like that, and the glow didn't move with the wind. By the time I reached the depot, the sun was starting to push light across the horizon. The event was hours ago in real time, but it felt like it had stretched out, moments dragging one after another. I parked the van, took a deep breath, and tried to shake it off. Later, I told my supervisor, half laughing, trying to sound casual. He nodded, said maybe a transformer or a low cloud catching city lights. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to. But I could still feel it, the hum vibrating faintly in my chest like an echo left behind by something that shouldn't exist. That night, on the drive home, I found myself looking up at the sky more than the road. Every flicker of light in the distance made me check instinctively. Every shadow along the tree line made me tense. I didn't see the glow again, but I could feel the memory of it, the way it hovered silently, completely indifferent to me or my van. I parked at home and sat in the driveway for a while. The neighborhood was quiet, normal. No hum, no flickering lights, no pale glow drifting across the sky. I finally got out, leaned against the van, and let the cold air settle on me. I couldn't explain it. Nothing about it fit with anything I knew. And yet, it happened. I've made deliveries in that area dozens of times before and since. I've seen fog, power blips, strange reflections, you name it, none of them compare. Every time the night is still, I find myself glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see that soft oval of light drifting slowly, moving in ways that no earthly thing should. I don't tell anyone else about it anymore. You can't. People would laugh or shake their heads. But I remember every flicker of lights, every soft hum, every impossibly slow drift of that glow. It was real, in a way that doesn't fit into the world we think we know, and the quiet that followed it, that, I think, haunts me more than the glow itself. I was midway through a solo weekend hike up in the Cascades, the sort of trip I'd done countless times. But that morning, something felt off from the start. The fog hung thick around the lower ridges, clinging to the trees and bleeding down into the valleys. I'd parked near the trailhead around 5 a.m., and the air was damp and cold, the kind of wet chill that seeps through your jacket if you're not careful. I started up the ridge just as the first hint of light pushed through the clouds. I had my usual gear, pack, water, granola bars, and my phone for navigation and emergency signals. It never failed me. But as I reached the first major lookout, I noticed my phone acting weird. No signal. That wasn't unusual so far up, so I shrugged it off, assumed it was the trees or the rocks interfering. But then my GPS stopped updating, and my watch, my digital watch, froze. Everything electronic in my pack was dead as if someone had hit a kill switch. I frowned and looked around. The ridge was deserted, no other hikers anywhere, not even a squirrel moving through the mist. The air felt heavier, but I couldn't explain why. I checked the phone again. Nothing. No service bars, no GPS lock, just a blank, unresponsive screen. I kept climbing, trying to shake the unease. The fog thinned as I gained elevation, and the sun was starting to rise, though it struggled through a thick gray cloud layer. That's when I saw it. Above the ridge, maybe 50 yards off the trail, a faint light hovered in place. It wasn't a street lamp or a reflection. There was nothing to reflect, just mist and rocks. But it had a soft, pale glow, like a distant lantern smothered in fog. It wasn't moving fast or making a sound. just hanging there, almost absurdly still. I stopped and stared. My first thought was a helicopter caught in low visibility, but the outline was wrong. There was no noise, not a single whir of blades, no blinking red or green lights either. And the shape wasn't sharp or angular, it was diffused, almost watery around the edges, like the fog itself had taken form and held a light inside it. I raised my binoculars, trying to get a better look. When I focused on the glow, it shifted slightly, almost as if it noticed me. I dropped the binoculars, heart hammering. I was alone on a ridge, miles from the nearest road, and nothing I could recognize was up there. I took a cautious step forward, half expecting it to move or vanish. Instead, it stayed put, lingering. The more I looked at it, the weirder it felt. I tried my phone again. Dead. My headlamp wouldn't turn on either. My watch, normally reliable, just sat there, frozen at 5:47. It wasn't a coincidence. Everything electronic had stopped the moment I noticed the glow. I backed up a few steps, breathing faster than I expected. The light didn't pulse or blink. It just hung there, diffused, quiet, and utterly still. I scanned the ridge around me, looking for a source. Anything human. A drone maybe. Someone up there with a lantern or a reflective jacket. Nothing. The ridge was empty. I called out, my voice swallowed by the fog and distance. Nothing answered. The light didn't flicker or react beyond that slight drift I'd noticed through the binoculars. I couldn't tell how far away it was. My brain kept running through possible explanations, a lens flare from the mist, a reflection off wet rocks, but it didn't behave like any of those things. And the electronics dying at the same moment was wrong. Minutes passed. I stayed put, unable to move or look away, watching as the faint light hovered just above the tree line on the ridge ahead. It didn't descend or ascend, didn't blink or change intensity, just existed there. The fog swirled gently around it, giving it this almost unreal floating quality. I tried taking a step closer again. My legs felt heavy, though I wasn't tired. Every instinct was telling me to run, but my curiosity was stronger. I stopped 10 feet short, realizing my breath sounded unnaturally loud in my own ears. The light shifted slowly, almost deliberately, moving laterally, then stopping again. Time became a blur. I don't know exactly how long I watched it, but it felt like hours. My watch said nothing different. My phone didn't respond. The light stayed there, calm and quiet, and then, almost imperceptibly, it began to drift away. Not fast, just slowly, heading toward the far end of the ridge, fading slightly as it went. My heart sank as it grew dimmer, finally disappearing into the fog, leaving only the gray, empty ridge behind. I stood there for another long moment, half expecting it to return. My electronics stayed dead for a few minutes more, then flickered back to life one by one. Phone, watch, GPS. Everything rebooted like nothing had happened, except for me, still standing on the ridge with my stomach knotted and eyes scanning the fog for a hint of the glow. The rest of the hike down, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed or watched. Nothing appeared. The lower I went, the warmer and clearer it got, and by the time I reached the trailhead, everything felt normal again. Signals returned, my watch ticked correctly, and the cars in the parking lot looked the same as when I'd arrived. I've told a few friends about it. Some laughed, said the altitude and fog were messing with my head, maybe. But it was too consistent, too precise. The way the electronics cut out exactly when I noticed the light, the slow drift, the way it moved almost thoughtfully, it didn't fit any natural explanation I know. Since then, I've stayed away from that particular ridge. I still hike the Cascades, but I can't shake the memory. And sometimes when I'm alone on a trail in the early morning fog, I swear I see a faint glow just above the trees, paused as if waiting. Always just out of reach, just enough to make me wonder if I ever really left that ridge, or if whatever was up there is still waiting for me to notice again. Even now, I feel the unease when I look at a foggy ridge or see my watch freeze for a second in a quiet room. That light was there. I know it was there. And part of me keeps wondering if the next time it won't drift away at all. The fog was heavy that morning, clinging to the docks and hanging low over the water, like the harbor itself was breathing in slow, damp breaths. I had gotten there earlier than usual, around 4 a.m., mostly because I couldn't sleep. The town still slept, the streetlights cutting dull orange circles through the mist, and the air smelled sharp, wet, and briny. I carried my gear down the old wooden pier, the boards slick under my boots, and untied my skiff. It bobbed gently against the pilings, more restless than usual in the fog, or maybe it was just me noticing. I pushed off quietly, letting the small motor guide me into the channel. Normally the gulls are noisy this early, squawking over scraps and the occasional fish tossing itself at the surface. Not today. Complete silence. It felt wrong. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the first flicker, barely visible at first, a faint pale light moving just above the water. I thought it was a buoy, or maybe a reflection from a dock lamp, but the fog distorted everything. I stopped the motor and stared. The light bobbed slightly, but it didn't drift with the current. It moved independently, almost like it was gliding. I leaned forward and shined my flashlight toward it. The beam hit nothing. No buoy, no floating debris, nothing at all. The light didn't respond, didn't refract, didn't move faster or slower. It just kept that gentle, impossible motion. I tried to talk myself into rational explanations. Fishing lanterns? Someone on a nearby boat? But the harbor was dead, and I could see the silhouettes of the other boats, all tied up and dark. I raised the flashlight again, and the light blinked out, instantly. Just gone. I scanned the fog, my heart racing a little. The water was still. The pier, the skiff, even the faint waves looked normal. I drifted a little closer, trying to get a better look. Then more lights appeared, 3 of them now, spaced out as if in formation. They moved over the surface slowly, without disturbing the water, and without sound. I could hear my own breath in the fog, the creak of the oars, the subtle slap of the skiff against the water, and nothing else. I aimed my flashlight again. The lights vanished like someone had switched them off. The harbor was empty, quiet, normal. My pulse had picked up, and I realized I was holding my breath, trying to convince myself it was my eyes playing tricks, that the fog and early morning light were fooling me. But I couldn't shake the memory of the lights moving in a deliberate pattern. I drifted in the skiff, keeping my eyes on the water, half expecting the lights to reappear. Then I noticed something else. The harbor's normal reflections from the distant streetlights were flickering oddly, bending in ways that didn't make sense. It wasn't the fog. I know the fog. I've been out here in mornings like this plenty of times. These distortions were unnatural. I reached for my radio, thinking maybe another fisherman had spotted something, but I remembered I hadn't seen anyone out here. I muttered into the mic anyway, but there was no reply, just the static and the low hum of the fog. Then one of the lights reappeared, closer now, floating above the surface of the water. It was a pale, cold color, not quite white, not bright, not warm. It seemed to drift toward me, slow, careful. I froze. My hands gripped the oars, knuckles white, and I dared not move. It stopped a few yards away, hovering above the water. I could see the faint outline against the fog, a subtle glow, almost imperceptible, but distinct. It didn't wobble, didn't pulse, just hovered. I raised the flashlight again. Nothing. The light vanished in an instant. The harbor went still, completely normal. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding and paddled toward the pier. The gulls had started making noise again, some diving toward the water. The sound, a sudden and jarring return to reality. The streetlights across the bay reflected normally on the water, and the skiff's gentle rocking felt mundane. I tied the boat up and sat on the edge of the pier, staring into the fog. My hands were still shaking slightly, and I realized my chest ached with tension I hadn't noticed. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Reflections, hallucinations, tricks of the light. Maybe, but I knew the pattern of movement, the way the lights vanished the moment I tried to illuminate them. That couldn't be explained by fog alone. I stayed for a while longer, watching the water, hoping maybe to catch the lights again or some sign, but nothing moved. Everything was ordinary. The sun was just beginning to rise, dull orange bleeding through the fog, and the harbor came alive again. Boats started motoring out, gulls screeched and swooped, and the fog lifted gradually, revealing the familiar shapes of the town and the distant hills. I packed up slowly, dragging my skiff back to the storage area. Every now and then I glanced back over the water, half expecting to see the pale lights drifting silently toward me again. They never did. On the drive home, I kept my eyes on the harbor in the rearview mirror. Everything seemed ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved over the water, something that wasn't part of the harbor, the fog, or the early morning. When I got home, I made coffee and stared out the window at the bay. It looked calm, completely normal, but I could still picture the lights floating silently over the water, vanishing the instant I tried to find them. Even now, when the fog rolls in over the harbor in the mornings, I glance toward the channel. Nothing appears, but I remember. I remember the way the water seemed too still, too perfect, like it had been watched. And I know I was the only one there to see it. I was halfway home, heading down Country Road 17 when I noticed the first flicker. The street light above the bend, the one that's always dim and leaning, blinked off for just a second, then back on. I thought maybe it was a surge from the rainstorm earlier or a loose connection, so I didn't think much of it. But then the next one, about 100 yards further, did the same thing. Flickered, went out, then came back. The road was quiet. It's a back road, really, if mostly farmland on either side, with patches of pine and oak breaking up the fields. I could see the glimmer of water in a pond at the edge of a field to my right, and the only sound was the windshield wipers swishing lightly over the wet glass. The night was unusually clear after the rain, and the air smelled of damp earth and wet grass. By the third light, I started paying closer attention. Each one flickered in sequence as I passed. Not all at once, like just the one nearest me, then the next, then the next. It wasn't the timing of my car either. I stopped for a moment at a curve to check my phone for the map, and the lights kept doing it. The blinking was subtle, almost like the lights were hesitating, unsure whether to be on or off. I glanced up through the windshield, and that's when I saw it. A dim, circular glow drifting above the trees along the horizon. It was low, low enough that the treetops seemed to reach for it, but not close enough to make out any structure. The glow was soft, not bright, like someone had taken a flashlight and diffused it through frosted glass. It moved slowly, smoothly, no sound at all. No engine hum, no wind, nothing. I blinked and tried to adjust my eyes. It kept moving, parallel to the road, following the line of trees. I could see a few faint stars behind it, and they didn't shift as it moved, which made it feel even more unreal, like it existed in its own little bubble of sky. I wanted to tell myself it was a drone, or a reflection of my headlights off a low cloud. Nothing about the motion made sense. No drone I'd ever seen moved with such smooth, even motion, and the sky was clear, no clouds low enough for reflection. I slowed my truck and parked on the shoulder, leaving the engine running. The flickering streetlights continued, as if the glow in the sky and the lamps on the road were connected somehow. I got out, feeling the wet grass soak through my boots, and leaned on the hood, just staring. Milo, or any dog or cat, would have been barking by now if something had been audible, but the world was unnervingly quiet. The usual nighttime sounds, cicadas, distant traffic, the rustle of wind through the leaves had gone soft, muffled, like someone had turned down the volume on the earth. The glow drifted closer, or maybe I just got used to seeing it. It seemed larger now, a perfect circle of soft white, no defined edges. There was a faint pulse, almost imperceptible, like the light was breathing slowly. My chest tightened, not from fear exactly, but from the strangeness of how wrong it felt. Everything in that rural stretch of road had a rhythm, streetlights, wind, even the distant hum of power lines. But this thing had no rhythm I could read. I reached for my phone to take a photo. The screen lit up the interior of the truck faintly. I aimed at the glow and tapped the shutter. Nothing appeared. The display was blank, only my hands and the steering wheel visible, as if the camera refused to capture it. I tried again, moving closer to the edge of the road, and the same thing happened. The glow paused above a stand of pines, almost perfectly still for a few seconds. Then the streetlights all blinked back to steady at full brightness, one by one, and the circular light tilted slightly before drifting upward. Slowly, it rose above the tree line, the way a balloon catches a draft, until it disappeared into the blackness. The sky was empty again. The stars looked normal. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves as though nothing had happened. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. Every rational explanation I had kept colliding with the memory of the light. No sound, No wings, no reflection, no device. Just that soft, circular glow, drifting against the night like it had weight, but no gravity. I got back in the truck, hands trembling slightly, and drove home slowly, eyes glued to the treetops, expecting it to reappear, but it didn't. At home, I told myself it was a weird reflection, maybe a plane with landing lights diffused through the low clouds. But the clouds were gone. Maybe a drone, but I hadn't heard a motor. Maybe a satellite, but it had moved too slowly and was too low. None of it fit. I checked the truck lights and interior before getting inside the house. Everything seemed normal. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, heart still thumping. The house smelled faintly of damp wood from the rain. I left the porch light off, went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, and even though the room was quiet, my ears were ringing slightly, like the air was still settling. Over the next few days, I found myself checking the treetops when I walked past the windows, feeling a little too aware of the night. Every flicker of a streetlight made me glance upward, half expecting to see the same glow. Milo, my cat, seemed fine. The neighbors hadn't noticed anything, or maybe they had but didn't speak of it. I didn't tell anyone else, because how do you explain a dim, drifting circle of light that disappears? I keep thinking about the way it moved, calm, controlled, and utterly silent. The pulse of the light almost like it was alive in some way I couldn't understand, and the way the streetlights flickered, as if connected, responding to its presence. It's been a week, and the memory feels as strange now as it did that night. Every time I drive down Country Road 17, I glance at the sky, half expecting to see that circular glow again. It hasn't returned. The streetlights work fine, the trees sway normally, the night is quiet but normal. But sometimes when the air is still, I think I can feel it passing above, just out of sight, moving silently across the sky. And I still wonder what it was. I woke to a dim, bluish light filling my bedroom. At first, I thought I'd left my phone on, or maybe one of those nightlights was casting a weird glow through the blinds, but everything in the room looked normal except for the color. It wasn't bright, more like a faint mist of light that made the edges of furniture look slightly blurred. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. The light didn't flicker, didn't shift. It just hung there, soft but unmistakable. My bedroom faces the backyard, so I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, expecting maybe some neighbor's car, a porch light, something obvious. Nothing. The yard was dark, the trees casting their usual shadows, nothing moving. I pressed my face closer to the glass. Even the street was quiet. No cars, no dogs barking, no passing headlights. The bluish light didn't seem to be coming from outside either. I backed away and noticed my digital alarm clock. The numbers glowed in the usual red, but the time? It was strange. I had woken up at 3:14 a.m., I thought. The clock read 3:34. I blinked, thinking I'd misread it in the dim light. I hadn't been asleep for 20 minutes. I was sure I just opened my eyes a second ago. I stepped carefully over the blanket, still keeping my gaze on the light. It wasn't coming from any lamp, not from the ceiling fixture. Nothing. It was like the room itself had developed a soft glow, as if the air had changed. I moved toward my bedroom door and peered into the hallway. Everything was normal. The hall light off, the hardwood reflecting the bluish glow from my room just faintly. The house was silent. I called out softly to my cat Misty, who sometimes sleeps in the living room. No meow, no rustle. She was probably curled up somewhere. I returned to the window, scanning again for anything. A flashlight in the distance, a drone, a neighbor walking a dog. Nothing. Just dark trees and empty streets. I went back to my bed and sat down slowly, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. I couldn't explain the light. My rational brain was throwing out all sorts of ideas. Power surge, strange reflection, maybe some chemical reaction with the plastic in my blinds. But nothing fit. The light didn't flicker, it didn't pulse, it didn't move. It was too even, too steady. Then the faintest sound caught my attention, a soft humming, barely audible, almost under the threshold of hearing. I strained my ears. My apartment doesn't have central air, no electronics running at night except my fridge, and even that hum is familiar. But this was different. It was constant, soft, like a distant transformer, but warmer somehow. I pressed my hand to the wall. Nothing. I got up again and moved around the room, trying to see if the light changed. It didn't. And yet, I felt like something was being drawn toward the ceiling, or at least that my attention was being tugged upward. I sat back down, heart rate climbing. Misty appeared from the shadows by the door, tail low, ears perked. She stared toward the corner near my door, the light reflecting off her fur, her body tense. I whispered her name. She didn't move, not even a twitch. Then, as quietly as it had started, the light dimmed slightly, and I noticed the humming fading. I glanced at the clock again, 3:54. 20 minutes gone, just like that. No memory of any time passing, no dozing, no nothing. It was as if I'd been frozen while the world continued. I got up to check the doors, make sure nothing had come in, locked, windows closed, everything normal. I even checked the backyard from the porch door, empty, silent. Misty followed me, cautious but calm once we were out of the room. I returned to the bedroom. The light had softened even more, and now almost imperceptible. I leaned back against the wall, trying to process. I couldn't find a cause. No electronics, no reflections, nothing in the yard. And yet, the room had been filled with that glow, that humming, and 20 minutes had passed in a kind of fog that wasn't sleep. I sat there for another half hour until the light faded completely. The room looked exactly as it should. Dark shadows, familiar furniture outlines, nothing strange except my pulse still racing, and Misty brushing against my leg like she'd been waiting for me to sit down. The next morning, I went over the room, checked every lamp, every device. Everything worked normally. No burn marks, no unusual reflections, nothing to suggest what had happened. The clock kept perfect time, and yet the sense of lost time lingered. I've lived here for years, alone, in an apartment that has never once given me cause for concern. I've stayed up late, woken in the middle of the night, stared at the ceiling wondering about insomnia, about dreams, about the quiet world, but nothing had ever filled the room with light and left me with that strange, suspended awareness. I can't explain it. I can't find a rational cause. Friends and family have offered ideas, reflection, malfunctioning bulb. Maybe I dozed and imagined it, but I can still feel it when I think back. The quiet, the soft glow, Misty frozen in place, the humming just beyond comprehension. I haven't seen it since. Not the light, not the humming, not the lost minutes. The night feels normal again, the apartment dark and familiar. But sometimes, when I wake before dawn, I glance at the clock and the faintest shadow of blue seems to linger in the corners. And for a moment, I remember those 20 minutes that disappeared into nothing. I've tried not to dwell on it too much, tried to chalk it up to fatigue or stress. But even now, when the world is quiet and the early morning light just begins to creep across my walls, there's a part of me that wonders if it could happen again. If the room might suddenly glow and time might slip away while I blink. I'd been hiking the ridge trail later than usual that night. My headlamp cast a narrow cone of light over the dirt path, and the woods around me were thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. Usually, even this late, I could hear something, crickets chirping, frogs croaking somewhere in the distance. But as I rounded a bend, it all stopped. I froze, standing on the trail, listening. No wind, no rustling leaves, not a single insect. Even the small creek that runs off the trail was quiet, no splashing water. My flashlight beam caught on the moss-covered roots and the low branches, and the silence hit harder. It wasn't just quiet, it felt wrong, like the forest itself had paused. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe I just walked into a pocket where the wildlife had temporarily quieted down. Could happen, right? I adjusted my pack, shoving my hands into the straps, and started forward again, slow steps on the packed earth. Then I saw it, a soft white glow moving slowly through the trees overhead, not flickering like a lantern or a flashlight. Smooth, steady, almost pulsing very faintly. Too low to be a plane, too slow to be a drone. I've seen plenty of night flights in these woods. This was different. It moved above the treetops, just under them, and didn't make a sound. I stopped again, trying to gauge its distance. My brain was telling me it was some kind of reflection, maybe a car down the valley, but the trail I was on is isolated. There's no road for half a mile, and I could see the faint lights of the nearby town from the ridges behind me. This wasn't coming from that direction. I fumbled with my camera trying to get a photo, but the moment I turned it on, the glow seemed to hesitate, like it noticed me, and then continued along the tree line. I lowered the camera, feeling my heart beat fast. I told myself it was just a branch catching some stray light from the stars, some natural phosphorescence, anything normal. It kept moving, slow, deliberate. I walked cautiously, trying to stay on the trail but keep it in sight. Every few seconds, the silence around me would press in. No crickets, no frogs, not even the occasional rustle of a small animal. It felt like the woods had been muted, as if my presence had been amplified by the absence of normal sound. I tried calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded weird, too loud, echoing faintly between the trees. Nothing answered. The glow drifted past a clearing, and I could see its shape better. Faintly oval, but hard to define. No edges, no contours, just a soft, white, steady light moving horizontally. I blinked, and for a moment I thought I lost it. Then it reappeared, a little farther down, as though it hadn't moved at all, but I'd changed position. I stopped and crouched behind a low, fallen log, thinking about calling someone, but I'd gotten out here specifically to avoid people. My phone's signal was weak anyway, just the faint bar at the edge of the ridge. I debated walking back the way I came, but every instinct told me not to turn my back. The glow didn't change speed or direction. It seemed aware of me without being aggressive. Not moving toward me, not away. Just moving, almost floating. My fingers tightened around my flashlight. Every time I swept it toward the light, the glow didn't flicker or respond. It just kept its slow, horizontal drift. A branch snapped behind me. My heart jumped. I swung my light back, expecting maybe a deer, but saw nothing. The glow in front of me remained, steady, calm, and impossibly low. It didn't make a sound. No engine, no mechanical hum, nothing that suggested movement at all, except the faint shifting through the treetops. I crouched low, breathing slowly. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me was rooted there, unable to look away. Every instinct in my body was yelling at me that this was unnatural. But I told myself that I'd be the first to admit if I was hallucinating or seeing some reflection. I've hiked here in worse conditions, alone at night, and never felt like the woods were holding their breath. I slowly started forward, trying to keep the glow in sight while edging back toward the lower trail, the one that led toward the valley and, eventually, lights and people. As I walked, the glow moved in sync with me, not changing pace, not reacting to my movement, just sliding over the treetops. Minutes passed. I had no sense of distance. I thought about stopping again, but if I paused too long, I worried I'd lose whatever it was completely. It kept drifting, calm and silent, over the ridge and toward the lower pines. I kept moving, and the silence in the forest never broke. No insects, no frogs, no wind. Just me and this moving light. Then, gradually, as if someone had flipped a switch, the insects started up again. The crickets came back first, quiet at first, then louder. A frog croaked somewhere off to the left. The wind brushed through the leaves. And the glow, I don't know how to describe it, seemed to rise slightly, then fade entirely, like mist evaporating. One moment it was there, the next the sky was dark and normal again. I slowed, almost stumbling. I looked around, waiting for some sign that it was hiding, but the woods looked like any other night. Stars above, branches moving in the wind, normal sounds. I stayed there a long while, letting my pulse slow, listening to the returning chorus of frogs and insects. I didn't see it again. I walked the rest of the trail to the parking lot, my flashlight off, relying on the faint starlight. The town lights were a few miles away, and when I got in my car, I kept checking the tree line, half expecting to see the glow reappear, hovering just out of reach. That night, and for weeks after, I kept thinking about it. I've hiked this trail hundreds of times. I've been out in the woods at all hours. Nothing ever behaves like that. Silent, steady, moving against the wind, existing just below the treetops. I can't explain it. I don't know if it was some strange natural phenomenon or something else entirely. But I know I wasn't imagining the silence, the way it moved, the feeling that the forest itself had paused while it passed. I've gone back since, during the day, and even on other night hikes, but it never happened again. Still, sometimes when the wind is calm and the crickets stop for a moment, I swear I can feel it, drifting through the treetops, silently, just out of sight. It was close to midnight when I started the drive back from Clearbrook. I'd stayed later than I meant to at my buddy Aaron's place, just sitting around his garage with a couple beers, talking about the usual nothing. He lives about an hour from me, but the way home cuts through a low valley along Route 61, and that stretch is always tricky at night. The fog builds up down there like a blanket, especially in the fall. That night was worse than usual. I hit the fog about 20 minutes into the drive. It wasn't the patchy kind where you can still see sky between dips. It was thick, soup thick, where my high beams just bounced white back into my eyes. I clicked them down to low and crawled along at maybe 40, hugging the right side of the road. The air felt heavier inside the car, like I was breathing the fog too. About halfway into the valley, I noticed something strange. The fog ahead of me wasn't just reflecting my headlights. It had this pale glow to it, almost like the light was inside the fog itself. At first, I thought it might be a house or a barn off the road, or maybe construction equipment with floodlights. But the glow didn't look anchored anywhere. It kind of pulsed, faint but steady, like a lantern was being moved around in there. I slowed even more, leaning forward, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that another car was pulled over up ahead with hazards on. I turned the radio down without really thinking, listening for an engine, but the night was silent except for my tires humming on the wet pavement. The glow grew stronger as I got closer, until it filled the fog maybe 100 yards ahead. It wasn't red or orange like taillights, it was white with a hint of green, like those LED shop lights, but softer somehow. My stomach tightened. I can't explain why, but there was something about the way it just sat there in the fog, perfectly still, that felt wrong. I eased my car to the shoulder and stopped, engine idling. The glow hung there, spilling across the road, lighting the trees on both sides in this weird muted way. No shadows, no sharp edges, just a haze. I sat there for maybe a minute, debating whether to drive through it. That's when it happened. Without any sound, no hum, no whir, nothing. The glow lifted. Not gradually, like smoke drifting up, but straight up, vertical, like someone yanked it on a string. 1 second, it was right there, filling the road, and the next it was rising into the fog above. My jaw actually dropped. I watched it shoot upward, perfectly smooth, no flicker, no sway. The glow went higher and higher until it disappeared into the low clouds above, leaving only the regular gray fog in front of me. The whole valley seemed darker after that, like someone turned off a light. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, even though I wasn't moving. I rolled down the window, half expecting to hear something in the trees, but there was only silence. No crickets, no wind, nothing. I finally put the car back in drive and crept forward, easing past the spot where the glow had been. There was nothing on the ground, no cars, no equipment, no tracks on the shoulder. Just damp pavement and fog pressing in close on both sides. I kept going, eyes flicking between the road and the sky above. The fog hid most of it, but every so often I thought I saw a faint shimmer behind the clouds, like something moving higher up, too far to really track. I tried not to stare. My focus kept snapping back to the road lines in front of me, white paint fading into the mist. The rest of the drive through the valley stretched on forever. I kept expecting the glow to reappear around the next bend, but it didn't. Just fog, mile after mile, until finally I climbed out of the low ground and the air cleared. By the time I got home, my shirt was damp from sweat. I shut the car off in the driveway and sat there for a while, staring at my porch light through the windshield, too wired to move. The whole ride, I kept replaying it in my head, trying to slot it into something normal. Some kind of spotlight, a helicopter, maybe a weird reflection from another vehicle. But there hadn't been any noise, not even the faintest. And the way it rose, quick and smooth, cutting straight up into the clouds without drifting, that's what kept bothering me. I didn't tell Aaron about it the next day. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt too strange to even say out loud. It wasn't until weeks later that I finally mentioned it to a coworker in passing, just to see his reaction. He shrugged, said maybe it was a drone with a big light. I nodded, pretended that made sense, but inside, I knew it hadn't looked or moved like any drone I'd seen. Since then, every time I drive that route at night, I slow down without thinking when I reach the valley. My eyes always go to the fog ahead, half expecting to see that same glow waiting for me. So far, it hasn't come back. I was putting the last bag of birdseed in the back of the delivery van when the sign over the store started to twitch. We'd been having trouble with the old fluorescent at the front. The letters in the open went dim now and then. You could hear the ballast whining if you stood out on the porch on a quiet night. Tonight, the buzzing had a different rhythm. It wasn't the usual electrical stutter, not the kind you get when an old tube's about to die. The letters blinked twice, then steadied. Then one of the tubes flashed with a long, drawn-out flicker like someone taking a breath and not letting it out. I glanced at my watch. It was 10 after 10. Closing time. The highway had been empty for hours, and the pickup that usually idled by the gas pumps had gone sometime after 9. I had already swept the floor and stacked the paperbacks on the return shelf, put the last lottery slips in the drawer. Locking up was the part I liked. Shutting out the night, lining up the receipts, the click of the deadbolt. Today, the click sounded louder than normal. As I rolled the shutter down, it was a slow, creaky metal thing that you had to coax. The flicker in the sign did that small, quick stutter again. I took it as a sign the bulb was finally giving up and made a mental note to ring Mike, the electrician, in the morning. I turned the key in the front door, the store going dark except for the faint glow from the cooler lights in the back, and one neon beer logo with a stubborn blue that never quite matched anything else. I locked the door and clicked the sign switch to off. The open went dark, but the humming from the fixture didn't stop right away. It faded into the air like a radio dropping out. I walked to the van, shoved the seat in, and as I pulled the ramp up, I saw it, up above the western tree line, a pale oval moving against the night. It wasn't a plane. There was no navigation light, no blinking. It moved too smoothly, like someone had taken a piece of milk glass and was sliding it across the sky. It was the kind of light that didn't have a source you could name. I stood with the van door halfway down and watched it trace a slow arc above the line of dark pines. Even in the street lamp's orange wash, it looked wrong. Colder, as if the night around it had been bleached. Hands full of seed bags, I swore out loud. Nobody likes the weird on a Tuesday night, especially not when you're alone and the register's in your pocket. I closed the van and walked back to the front of the store, because when something odd is out there, I still want the easy explanations. I flipped the sign back on and watched the letters sputter themselves into life. The oval was still there, drifting like a lazy songbird. I got the binoculars from behind the counter like I always do when the deer come down the road and mess with farmers' headlights. Through them, the oval didn't sharpen so much as take on a grainy clarity. It had a soft edge like fog around a porch light and a very faint inner glow that seemed steadier at the top than the bottom. There was no shape beneath it, no dark underside, nothing to suggest a craft, a balloon, a satellite, just that flat, pale oval moving in a steady line. Against the grain of looking cool, I fumbled for my phone. Camera, quick photo, send it to Mike, get a laugh, finally sleep. The camera app stalled before it warmed up. The screen went gray, then vibrant, then the photo came back all right, except where the oval was, a washed-out smear. I tried again, same smear. I cursed and put the phone in my pocket, because when technology starts to flake, the confidence that follows goes with it. There were little things that night that I couldn't quite file away. The gas pumps had that thin blue ring of LED on their hoses that usually twinkled when you pushed a button. Tonight, one of them pulsed once in perfect time with my heartbeat. The old clock behind my register, the cheap plastic thing I never bothered to replace, had stopped. Not at a sensible time, like exactly closing time, but in the middle of a minute. The hands were a fraction shy of 12:50. I wound it. It ticked once and went lazy again, then stilled. I made a joke to myself about the wiring and everything, giving up the ghost, but didn't say it out loud. The oval kept moving. It cut over the town and slowed as if taking inventory of each roof it passed. A dog 2 doors down started yapping and then shut up. I could hear some foxes answer from the far end of Maine. My neighbor Joyce came out to her porch for a smoke. She must have seen it too because she shaded her eyes and squinted the way she did when trying to find a moonrise. though her mouth didn't shape a word. "You seeing that?" she called across the street. "Yeah," I said, because what else do you say? We both watched it drift toward the old mill and then slide on, skimming the black water of the river like a pale stone. I locked the van, took the keys, and started the walk home. It's 5 minutes at a brisk pace. Cattle begin longer if you take the back alleys and wave at the stray cats who patrol the dumpsters. I kept glancing up. The moon was a thin sliver, the stars peppered but not bold, and the oval moved slow enough that I thought maybe it was way up high and just seemed low. But every time I checked objects down on the ground, the mill wheel, the crooked radio tower, the dark fields, the oval's position in relation to them didn't change right the way distance should. It was like something had fixed it to the skyline and then painted it across the road. On the corner by the hardware store, the streetlight flickered. Once, in time with the refrigerator in my place, kicking a notch louder. Power hiccups happen. We've had them in the spring when tractors spiked the line. But this was precise, as if the grid took a breath and then let it out. A car passed with its windows steamed, and the driver didn't slow down to look. People in this town have a way of carrying on regardless. I crossed the highway under the glow of the intersection sign. The oval came straight out over the river, then paused. For a long moment it hung there, like a coin balanced on its edge, and I felt the hair on my forearms rise. My pulse picked up a beat I can't explain. Not fear, exactly. More a small, steady alarm like a kitchen timer someone set wrong. I thought about waking my wife inside. She would laugh and say I was getting soft from too many nights in by myself. I did not go. The rational thing would have been to go get her, to make the weird less like a thing I'd seen alone. I stayed on the sidewalk and watched. When it finally moved again, it did so very deliberately. It didn't flit. It translated, gently, eastward, staying just above the tree line and keeping that same soft rim of light. As it passed over the high bluffs, the river reflected a pale smear, and for the briefest second it looked like the oval had a twin below it on the water, but the reflection never sharpened into anything that could be a hull or a silhouette. The surface of the river stayed dead smooth. By the time I reached my porch, my hair was damp with sweat, though it was a cool night. The house smelled like coffee, and the electric kettle my wife had left half on. She was at the sink, humming to the radio, oblivious. She didn't turn when I came in, didn't ask where I'd been. I told her, clumsy at first, like I was telling a joke I couldn't quite land. "There's a light," I said, "out by the mill. Weird one." She dried her hands and came to the window, slow, because she's always a slow mover at midnight until coffee does its thing. We watched the oval together. Seeing it with someone else tightened the thing inside my chest a notch. Having another pair of eyes there made the world less inclined to lie. She said it looked like an egg the moon forgot to crack open, and then made a face at herself for saying it. I laughed once. It sounded wrong. We stayed inside. The town had that late-hour quiet, cars passing now and then farther down the road, a bar closing somewhere on the far side of town. I made a pot of coffee. The radio in the kitchen went to static between songs, and then a DJ's voice padded back in like nothing had happened. The phone on the counter showed a missed call from Mike at 11:06. But when I dialed him back, his voicemail said his battery had died. That happens. He lives out by the interstate. His truck's lights wash the sky sometimes, and he'd been out fixing a line earlier that week. I left him a message anyway. Maybe he'd seen something on the way home. We didn't stay for the whole thing. The oval drifted on and then peeled off towards the east horizon where the sky meets more trees and some cornfields. It slowed, brightened a fraction, and then vanished like someone had rolled it up and put it away. It didn't shoot off like a rocket or snap shut like a camera. It simply became indistinct, smeared into the low cloud stripe until there was nothing but a memory of light. The rest of the night was ordinary in all the ways that count. The kettle clicked off. The radiator hissed. Our dog snuffled and then snored. I lay awake longer than I should have and kept replaying small details. The way the sign had flickered as if in response, the clock that had stopped for almost no reason, the dog 2 doors down dropping its bark mid-sentence. In the morning, everything looked like morning. The sign was dead and the owner had already gone by to scold the manufacturer. Mike called back and we arranged a time to replace the ballast. The clock on the wall ran like clockwork. A man watering his lawn waved as I drove down Main, as he always does, and the world wore its normal face. But when I sweep the store now, late at night, there are moments I pause and look up without meaning to. Sometimes the fluorescent hisses in a way that sounds almost like breath. Sometimes the neon beer sign buzzes for no reason. I tell myself to fix the wiring, to call the electrician early, to buy a new clock. Practical things. I don't have any good answer for the light that moved across the dark. I can only write down what happened as close as I can remember it, the way it made the night feel like it had a center, and how the town kept its head down and went on, like nothing significant had passed through our sky. I woke to my alarm and the lake already being a different color. It wasn't the usual gold of sunrise or the iron gray of pre-dawn. It was the sort of pale, flat light that comes right after a fog has settled into a place and decided to stay. I knew the sound of the campsite before I even opened my eyes. The creak a block over, the low tremble of someone else zipping their tent, an owl finishing whatever it had started. I rolled over and grabbed my phone to shut the alarm off, still half asleep, and then I heard it. A soft, regular tapping on the outer wall of the tent that wasn't the normal dawn noise. I sat up because the tapping had a rhythm to it, like someone dragging two stones together slowly. The tent fabric shifted as Max, my little mutt, moved under the covers. He was already awake, pressed against my feet. I unzipped the flap and stuck my head out, expecting to see one of the other campers, some teen with a frisbee, a jerk with a coffee can he thought was funny. It was 8 in the morning, the kind of hour where people are usually moving around, making smoky breakfasts. The campsite was empty. Chairs folded, coolers zipped, a stack of firewood, damp with last night's rain. When I looked out over the lake, the tapping stopped. The sound had come again only twice more, and then nothing, as if whoever had been doing it decided they were done. The water was this low, milky sheet, and the trees on the far shore were just silhouettes. That kind of fog that hangs on a lake in early September makes distance feel like a lie. Things look both closer and farther than you expect. I stepped out, barefoot on the cold ground, and the world smelled like river rock and wet canvas. I made coffee and watched steam rise into the fog. I hadn't slept much, restless like I always get when I camp alone, and my thoughts were the sort that pile up quietly. What I'd need to fix on the truck when I got home, whether to stop for a burger on the drive, that kind of low-level life stuff. I walked the little spit of sand toward the water with my mug in hand. Max padded by my side and kept looking up at the trees as if he expected a squirrel to fall out. There were small, odd things that morning, nothing big enough to be a headline, but enough to make me notice. The usual chorus of birds was subdued, like someone had turned their volume down. A loon called once somewhere far to my left and stopped as soon as it started, not the long, sliding calls I knew, but a short, broken sound that felt wrong. On the far bank, the reeds didn't move even though I felt the chill of a breeze on my face. There were a few small ripples where fish broke the surface, then nothing. And then as I put my mug down on a driftwood log, I saw the first dim light. It sat low over the water, not bright enough to glare, more like the color of a coin underwater. At first I thought it was a reflection, the way a cabin window picks up a pinprick of sunrise. But this light had no anchor. It hovered maybe a foot above the surface, just beyond where the weeds dropped off into deeper water. I squinted, trying to see if it was a lantern someone had set afloat. Nothing. No boat, no headlight, nothing moving except the pale hush of fog. Then 2 more appeared, spaced out in a line, 3 pale coins of light, each one steady. They were dim enough that my eyes had to adjust and bright enough that they cut through the mist in little columns. They hung over the lake like lighthouse models set down on the water and left. My first practical thought, reasonable, sensible, was that someone was doing some kind of fishing with underwater lamps. Except no one had been out past dawn, at least not in a spot this close to shore. Also, the lights didn't reflect on the surface the same way a lamp would. They made little halos in the mist, but the water under them stayed dark. I fumbled for my phone, to get a photo, but the screen stuttered and went black for a second. When it came back, the camera app froze on the loading wheel. By the time I got it to respond, the lights had drifted a little, not in random motion, but like a piece of string pulled equally from both ends. They moved apart, slow and exact, keeping a triangle shape, like 3 points of a compass running a precise pattern over the glassy lake. There wasn't any sound. No motor, no bobbing, just that soft rise and fall in my chest. Max emitted a low whine and leaned forward, hackles a little up. He doesn't do that often. I turned my flashlight on and swept the beam the way people do when they try to make sense of a strange thing, because a flashlight makes everything normal, at least in stories. The beam carved through the fog and the light cores stayed put, dull and indifferent. When I aimed the beam directly at the nearest one, it didn't change. If anything, the fog around it seemed thicker, the light itself staying the same pale coin. I called out to the other campers a lazy, "Hey, you seeing this?" But the only answer was the tap of my mug against the log when I put it down too hard. No one else stirred. I could hear the flap of a tent in the next row, but that was it. The 3 lights continued their slow divergence, staying equidistant like a small mechanism operating on rules I couldn't see. There were more small things. My watch, old and dependable, read 5 minutes ahead of my phone. The phone's battery indicator showed full, then dropped, then read full again like a mood swing. I don't usually pay that much attention to gadgets, but when your devices start acting like they have their own ideas, you notice. The campground's lone ranger, the elderly guy who runs the place, drove by in his pickup to collect the trash and stopped on the far loop. He lifted a hand like he recognized I was looking, but he didn't slow. No one else in the park seemed even aware. He disappeared behind a line of pines and the truck didn't come back. The lights drifted apart until they lined the quarter perimeter of the lake, almost forming a shallow arc. When one of them passed over where the reeds met the water, I saw a faint disturbance beneath it, like the reflection of something moving under the surface. But when it passed, the surface smoothed as if nothing had been there. That made me slide another step closer to the water, because humans are built to close distances and to look. I shuffled forward and my sneakers made half a false step on the wet sand. I tried to take a picture again. The phone wouldn't cooperate. The camera app would open. The screen would show me the pale light as a blur. Then the image would smear and go black where the lights were, as if the camera couldn't handle that particular frequency of brightness. I tapped the button, swore softly, and put the phone away. It felt stupid to stand there pushing buttons while something quiet and impossible moved in front of me. The morning thickened into that horizontal glow that comes just before the sun finds its way through fog. The lights synchronized. They slowed, then they turned with the precision of someone adjusting a joint. For a moment, they drew together in a triangle, the way 3 people might form if they were passing something between them, as pausing like that before doing something. I thought of a synchronized drone light show, but everything about this excluded the things I knew about. No whine of propellers, no jitter, no tiny corrections. These moved as if with an internal geometry. Then they did something that made my stomach drop. The 3 points began to ascend, all at once, not scattering, but slowly rising in perfect unison, as if they were held on invisible filaments. The fog swallowed them as they rose. Instead of streaking away or flaring, they slipped up into the mist and became dimmer until they were nothing but a suggestion in the clouds. I watched until I couldn't, until the point where my eyes tired of looking at fog and light and made themselves stop. When the lights were gone, the lake felt different. The fog had thinned a hair, like someone had decided the scene had been inspected sufficiently and the world could go back to normal. Sound settled back into its usual rhythm, the creek, a distant generator kicking on at one of the cabins, a dog barking somewhere over the hill. But nothing around me moved to explain what I'd seen. No boat engines, no people on shore, no discarded lanterns, no glowworms. My phone behaved itself again, the camera app responsive, battery steady. The watch matched the phone. It all looked normal and reasonable, like the morning had never held anything strange. I sat on a log and tried to think it through. For a while, I just sat there, not drinking the cold coffee, letting my pulse come down. My hands had that small tremor you get from too much adrenaline and not enough breakfast. I felt exposed in the middle of the clearing, like someone had taken a marker and drawn a border around the day. Eventually, I went back to the tent and packed with slow, precise motions. There wasn't any logic in leaving right away. It was only a few miles back to the highway, and I'd been looking forward to sitting in traffic with a burger, but I didn't want to spend another hour in that particular light. On the walk back to the truck, I passed the ranger's office and saw the man outside, fixing the screen on his pickup. He glanced up, and for a second his face was oddly unreadable. "Morning," he said, then went back to his screwing and didn't ask about the lake. A kid from the campsite who was burning off sugar on a bike zipped past and barely looked twice. The world had decided we were all going to pretend this was an ordinary morning. I drove home slow, windows down to take the fog out of my face, and I told myself explanations that made me feel better. Maybe someone had been testing lights for a boat survey. Maybe it was a rare kind of reflection. Maybe I was still half asleep and my brain had made a neat, small thing out of random noise. None of those fit perfectly, but they were small enough to hold in one hand and not be scary. When I stopped at a diner on the way out of town, I ordered eggs and coffee and listened to the TV in the corner whisper about the weather. The people at the counter argued about nothing, the way people do, and for an hour I let that mundanity settle over me like a blanket. I haven't gone back to that lake at dawn since. I've driven past it a few times in the evenings, and the water looks like water again, reflecting the highway lights, and the fog behaves like fog. I told one friend about it, saying the words out loud to see if they would rearrange into something neat. He shrugged and said it sounded like seeing will-o'-the-wisps. Another said maybe it was a geomagnetic thing. I didn't argue with either. I told him I hadn't taken a picture because the camera had glitched, and he laughed and said the universe hates evidence. Maybe he was right. Max and I still camp, not every weekend, but when I can. He doesn't seem worried. He's more interested in where I stash the sausages. Sometimes when I wake in the blue hour, I listen for small taps on the tent or for the odd rhythm of the world rearranging itself. Most of the time, there's nothing, which is what a morning is supposed to do. But once or twice in the back of my mind, I'll picture 3 pale coins moving in perfect geometry over the water, parting like 3 thoughts that never quite connect, and the way they rose together and slipped into the mist like someone closing a book. Milo stopped mid-step and would not move, which was the first thing that felt wrong, because Milo never paused on our evening walks unless he had a squirrel in his sights. He planted his front paws, head tilted up, ears forward, and his tail went still. I tugged the leash the way I always did when he fixated on something, light, patient, then tried again more firmly. He didn't budge. We were halfway down Maple Lane, the cul-de-sac empty, except for a single car idling at Mrs. Alvarez's driveway. It had rained earlier, the pavement still holding puddles that caught the last of the light, and steam rose from the gutters where the drains clogged with leaves. The streetlights were on, a few minutes earlier than usual, the soft yellow cylinders that made the puddles look like small moons. I remember thinking the evening smelled like damp concrete and cut grass, and for a second, I thought maybe Milo had picked up a scent on the wind. He was staring straight up. I followed his line of sight. At first I couldn't see anything but low clouds, a smear of gray that had drifted down off the ridge. Then I saw it. A rounded, darker shape moving against the lighter clouds, disc-like and just faintly luminous around the edges, like someone had rubbed a bit of light into the air. It wasn't bright. It wasn't a spotlight. It was the absence of stars where the sky should have been, soft, almost a shadow against the cloud, sliding slowly and silently across the patch of sky above the row of elms. The sound of Mrs. Alvarez's radio through her window cut off mid-song, like someone had reached for the dial and gone hands-free. The breeze that had been moving the leaves stopped altogether, and the street felt smaller, like everything had contracted a few degrees closer to the houses. Milo's chest rose and fell. He was completely still, not pulling or whining, just fixed. I said his name once, twice, and heard my voice come out thin in the quiet. I tried to get my bearings. The disc kept moving, steady and even. It traveled behind the tree line, altered the view of the clouds for a minute, then emerged over the tops of the elms again, perfectly level with the power lines. For a moment, it seemed to hang directly over the transformer on the corner, and the lights on the poles swung gently, as if nudged by something I couldn't hear. Then they dimmed, one after another, in a slow sequence from our side of the street to the far end of the cul-de-sac. When the porch light at number 9 winked out, I saw my neighbor through his kitchen window, frozen with his hand on a coffee mug. My phone was in my jacket pocket because I always carry it now. Old habits. I fumbled for it, grateful for the small rectangle of familiarity, and opened the camera. The screen showed the same sky as my eyes, but with a slight delay, as if the phone was catching up. I raised it, pointed, tapped the record icon. The screen stuttered once, then the image froze, pixels holding the exact frame while the little red recording dot blinked like evidence that something should be happening. I lowered the phone. The scene moved on without it. The light on my phone went black for a second, then came back with a quarter charge showing instead of the nearly full battery it had an hour ago. A dog barked somewhere 2 streets over. It barked twice and stopped completely, like its owner had called it silent. The insects were gone too. No mosquito whine, no distant cicada hum. The usual nighttime soundtrack had been swallowed. The air tasted like metal or like pennies, which made me notice the metallic tang at the edge of my own tongue. I remembered being taught as a kid that when the streetlights dim at once, you should look up. I don't know why, but I remember the phrase like a warning. The disc moved again, crossing the slice of sky above the small park. It was bigger up close, an unadorned oval, and the way it obscured the clouds made the patch of air under it seem thicker, not just darker. It drifted with no angle to its movement, as if it had no concern for wind or gravity, just a planned, straight line across the sky. I noticed the lines of its edge, rounded, not sharp like a shadow cast through fog. There was a faint pearly sheen to it, but no color, no patterns, nothing mechanical to indicate a craft or a drone. No navigation lights, no blinking strobes. Mr. Chen came out on his porch then, in slippers and a robe, holding the remote he'd meant to use to shut his garage. He squinted up the way we were all squinting and called, "Is that a?" and trailed off. He didn't say anything else. His face registered the oddness along with the rest of us, the silent agreement that words could not hold what we were seeing. He walked back inside without turning his head. Milo's head was still tipped back. His eyes shone glassy in the yellow light. I crouched, keeping one hand on the leash and one on his collar so he wouldn't bolt, and the leather of the leash felt cool and damp under my fingers. I wanted to move, to go closer to the street, to follow whatever path that shadow took, but an odd reluctance held me there, like someone else's hesitation had seeped into my bones. A car on the main road a quarter mile away came into view, lights bright. Then it slowed and turned off as if the driver had been waiting for an opening. The driver sat with the car idling, the silhouette visible through steam rising from the hood. The disc crossed directly above that car, and for an instant it looked as though the light from the vehicle might touch the underside of the oval, but nothing happened. The driver shook his head and pulled away like he decided the site was private business. He drove past us slowly, not stopping, and someone in the car leaned forward and pointed. I think I offered a wave without thinking, latch on to routine. He nodded once and kept going. The disc kept going, too. It crossed the sky in a way that made the stars around it seem to flinch, hiding for a second behind its shadowed band, then came out on the other side with the same faint glow. There was no sound, no rush, no wind. The hum of my own heart felt loud enough for me to hear it in my ears. The leaves of the elms rustled when the disc passed, but oddly, the rustle didn't match the motion. You could tell the trees were reacting to something, but the physics of it made no sense. When it reached the far side of the cul-de-sac, it did something I didn't expect. It tilted. Not a roll or spin, just a slight angle like tilting a plate to look at it edge on. For a breath, it thinned into a long shadow, and the light in its periphery dimmed further. Then it straightened and continued, moving away toward the ridge where the town fell away into the pines. I watched until it slipped behind the dark line of trees, and my eyes could no longer find it. The streetlights returned to normal at almost the same instant, one by one, like someone had turned a dial. The soundscape trickled back, the distant roll of tires, a dog bark, a neighbor closing a window. Milo lowered his head and yawned, as if he had been waiting for the walk to resume. He shook himself the way dogs do when they decide the world was unimportant after all, and he tugged forward to pull me along the route we'd been taking. I walked, feeling like I'd left a piece of attention up in the sky. My phone buzzed with a text from Jess asking if we were okay. A neighbor's message came through with a single question mark. I thumbed back, yeah, fine, because what else do you say after you watch something that shouldn't be explainable slide across the sky? That night I told myself a dozen ordinary stories. Weather balloon, odd reflection, a trick of the low clouds, and my tired eyes. I drove past the cul-de-sac twice later on to see if any trace remained, if any scientist's tape or a press crowd would appear. Nothing. The trees were normal, the gutters had their usual leaves, the transformer hummed a steady suburban drone. In the days after, small things kept happening that made the memory of that evening feel less like a single event and more like a line of small, inexplicable glitches. My neighbor's porch sensor light blinked at odd hours. A flock of starlings abandoned their roost at dusk and circled without landing for a bare minute before scattering. Once, my radio picked up a stream of static that formed a rhythm almost like a knock and then filled the whole car, the way sound can swell when it finds an empty cup. Each time, I'd look up and half expect to see that shadow moving again. I didn't post photos. The one I'd tried to take was corrupted, an angry smear of pixels that looked like someone had dragged a finger across the sensor. When people asked, I said the usual, weird cloud, lighting trick, probably just a plane. I could feel the strain of looking normal, of choosing the safe explanation. Milo still stares at the sky sometimes when we pass that stretch, and on nights when the moon is thin, I find myself pulling my collar up, smelling the air for metal, for pennies. I don't know what it was. I only know what it did to the order of the street for those few minutes, how it made the normal sounds of a neighborhood fall away until the quiet felt like an answer waiting to be read. We go out most evenings still. The route is the same. Milo has his preferred stops. People wave. The cul-de-sac is peaceful in its ordinary way. Every so often, though, I see a neighbor glance upward at nothing in particular, and we both know we checked the sky once and saw something that didn't belong. We walk home in the dark, and the house lights look ordinary and honest, and I tell myself we're safe. The rest is a shape I keep in my head, like a shadowed disk that crossed the sky and left the world to reclaim its sounds.